I can't do it. It's impossible.
Sure, you can. It's very simple.
They're so cool in different ways.
All right, well, let's start somewhere easier then. What's your least favorite? We can start there, eliminate a few, and then there's only going to be a few options by the time you have to choose your favorite.
James, there are thousands, tens of thousands.
There must be one that you don't like.
I guess that one.
Oh, really? Why?
I don't know. I don't know anything about it, so I don't know that I love it yet. This is agony. Each of them is incredible, streamlined, focused, perfectly designed for its purpose. I could spend my whole life looking at each one of them, and I wouldn't even be scratching the surface. They're us, James. They're like people. Beautiful, flawed, utterly unique, and if you take one away, it's not the same anymore.
Walt, they're just ants.
You take that back!
Oh, shout out to anyone that joined us in our stream not long ago.
Twitch.tv/getcommanded. Yes, the ants came up and were a significant talking point.
Surprising number of our listeners obsessed with ants.
It was one, and we had a great chat.
But also one is a surprising number of our listeners that is obsessed with ants.
That's true. Welcome to the Get Commanded podcast by the Greensboro Commander community. It's the GCP by the GCC and POG, Palms Off Gaming, sponsor of this podcast. We're all uniting forces to help you to have better games of Commander. I'm your host, Walt.
And hello, Commander players. I'm your other host, James. Now, before we get to the transmission for this Friday, I just wanted to give you guys the opportunity to support the content that you're listening to, and the best way to do it is on Patreon. So you can go to patreon.com/getcommandedpodcast. There's a bunch of really cool rewards in there. We can have a look at your deck lists, make some suggestions. We can play with you, even on Spell Table if you live far away, but we can meet up with you at local game stores in Melbourne if required. There's a bunch of different ways to do it. And I just wanted to say thank you to everyone that joined our stream genuinely the other week. We had a really, really good time. Walt and I kept to our promise from the last, 2 episodes ago, maybe, or 1 episode ago.
Can't recall.
Can't remember anymore, but we said we would stream the Lord of the Rings draft. We did. We went Rakdos, got orcs, amass orcs, and we did pretty well. We got some pretty gas. We got an Orcish Bowmasters, which was sick.
Yeah, that was actually really sweet.
But yeah, shout out to everyone that joined, and if you feel like supporting us so we can do more of that stuff and we can make it better and more enjoyable for you, the best way to do it is at patreon.com/getcommandedpodcast.
Yep, it's true. It's the best way to encourage us to make more of this stuff for you. So thank you. Now we do have an incoming transmission from the deep depths of the galaxy, from the Space Commanders. It's time to get commanded.
Walt has constructed many commander decks over the last several years, but how does he decide which of them to play in any given game? Where would his various decks be arranged if they were sorted into tiers?
Oh, we're going to get a tier list of your commander decks.
Apparently, man,
I'm excited. They're straight up calling you out now.
This is direct.
Some episodes they're glass cannons are really challenging, and I'm like, well, this episode's about you, Walt, isn't it? This is pretty serious. We're just going to go through your lists.
Yeah, straight up. I guess they probably have been inspired by the recent Command Zone episode by my favorite deck builder on the planet, Rachel Weeks.
She is an absolute god.
Yes.
God tier.
Love her deck so much. So she did basically almost exactly this. So it seems like the Space Commanders want me to do the same. That episode was only Rachel Weeks. So I guess we'll have to do it.
Do you want me to go away?
No. You're sticking around. We have to do it slightly differently, though, because she was just talking the whole time. Yeah. I don't want to do that. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on my decks.
Well, the other thing is, I think that there's something to say about what decks feel like to play against.
Yeah.
There's you can talk about all day how you built them, how you intend them to work, and all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, feedback on your own decks, you should actually seek quite a lot. I think if we're going to cram a Get Commanded message into this episode is get feedback on your decks. Find out what it's like for your friends to play against them, because I think it's going to be really rewarding for you to hear.
Well, I'm really interested to hear the relationship between how much fun I'm having at the helm of the deck and how much fun you're having playing against it.
Usually it's an inverse relationship. If you're having a lot of fun, I'm miserable. If I'm having a lot of fun, you're miserable.
Yeah.
It's like one of the two.
It's a lot of the time, so I'm interested to see how that all shakes up. So maybe what we'll do... Well, let's go through the template, because I've thought a bit about this and how I reckon we should break it down in for the sake of the fact that there's two of us here. So I think what we'll do, we'll start with, I'll give a rundown of how the deck works. So we'll go through each of my decks like this, doing all these questions. So how does the deck work? What's the strategy? How does it win? You know, the usual sort of like...
Rule Zero-y type.
Rule Zero-y, also kind of like, you know how at the beginning of game nights from Command Zone, how they do like my deck is an aristocrat's deck that wins by sacrificing blah blah.
Are you going to do it in American accent?
I'm not going to do it in American.
Cards?
No, I won't be doing any of that. But I will be giving that sort of a rundown of the deck. So like
Cool.
one sentence, super short. I think to give an idea of how the deck works, I'll give 2 key cards.
Yep.
I think Rachel called these cornerstones in hers because she had 4 of them.
We'll call them pillars.
Pillars.
Yeah. Make it different.
Subtle. I like it,
Yeah.
James. 2 key cards, 1 weird card, because I have to shout out, to be honest, a lot of these are going to be Thrifty Thursday.
I was about to say,
I
I feel like we may have heard some of these cards before.
Yeah.
But also, if you hear this card and go, oh, that'd be great in my deck, well, it's probably going to be like 15, 20 cents to pick up.
Yeah.
So.
When I say weird card, I mean weird budget card.
There's not many cards that are stupid and like act weirdly, and they're $20.
Well, I was under this impression, and then I watched Rachel Weeks' rundown of her decks. She finds weird cards that are like $20. She plays this card in her Octavia deck, Octavia Living Thesis. It's like a 3-mana blue bolt.
Damage.
Yeah,
in blue.
It deals 3 damage to any target and then deals 3 damage to you, I think. It's called like Psionic Blast or something weird. It's like $20 because it's a blue bolt.
That didn't come up in our philosophy episode.
No.
On blue. What a weird
It's
blue
really
card.
old, as you would expect. But
Yeah.
yeah, like she finds some cards like that. But yes, my ones are normally cheap because
Alright.
I don't have the money for it. So that's sort of the rundown of the deck. And then I'm going to talk about what it's like for me to pilot the deck. And I want to hear from you as well, as we talked about what you think of playing against the deck. And that was sort of a discussion of just like, what's the deck like in a game?
I played against all of your decks now, so
yeah. And then at the very end, I'll give my verdict on this very end of each deck. So how fun is it to play? Do I get to play it very often? And then how does that relate to which tier it goes into?
Are we doing, you want to do like an actual
I'm
tier
doing an
list,
actual
like an
tier
S
list.
tier? Okay,
So yeah,
right.
it'll be like S, A, B, C, D, I think is the way it
Sure.
goes. And that's from best to worst.
Yeah.
Yeah. Does that make
Alright,
sense?
That makes sense.
Cool.
I'm keen. Should we jump right into the first deck?
Let's do it. Let's do it.
Who's up first?
The first deck I want to talk about today is my Wart the Raid Mother deck.
Goblin Spellslingery.
Yeah. So this is a Wart the Raid Mother is a 6-mana Goblin Shaman. It's a 3/3, and it says when it's red-green, by the way. When Wart the Raid Mother enters the battlefield, put 2 1/1 red and green Goblin Warrior creature tokens onto the battlefield. And each red or green instant or sorcery spell you cast has Conspire. So as you cast the spell, you can tap 2 untapped creatures you control that share a color with it. When you do, copy it, and you may choose new targets for the copy. So basically, yeah, you're making a bunch of creatures and you're copying them with Wart's ability. So it's a fairly optimized glass cannon spellslinger deck that tries to make a billion goblins by copying spells, and tries to copy spells with those billion goblins. It just kind of like snowballs until it all comes together.
The cool thing about this deck is the goblins that Wart makes are red-green. So
Yes.
they immediately give you a Conspire on the battlefield already, which makes the deck like function when you cast Wart. There's not like a much setup after that.
No, it's true. It helps when you have more goblins, but you don't need that many because you're going to have 2 already with Wart. Yeah. So 2 of the key cards. Brightstone Ritual is a really important one. This is an instant for a single red that says add red for each goblin in play. It says on this old version of the card. I suspect that says on the battlefield now. Wow, so that checks your opponent's goblins too. That's random.
Wild.
That's super weird. Add red to your mana pool for each goblin on the battlefield.
I mean, this is ridiculous. This is a huge, like even just with Wart, this is like a better Pyretic Ritual.
Yeah, single
Yeah.
red, add 3 red. Yeah.
It's
And
Dark Ritual in red. That's so sick.
most of the time it's way better than that as
Yeah.
well. Like if you have 5, 6, 7 goblins, like
Oh my
single
god,
red,
I just
add 7
realized
red.
conspiring this means you...
Yeah.
Oh my lord, wow. Big
Yeah, that's
card.
the real tech
Yeah.
is getting a copy of it, and then you've got so much red mana.
Yep.
Another card that is a key card in this deck will be Gutter Snipe.
Goblin.
Yeah.
That's why it's in the deck, right?
It's also just a good one. For 2 and a red, it's a Goblin Shaman. It's a 2/2, and it says whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, Gutter Snipe deals 2 damage to each opponent. So this is going to be a way of winning outside of combat. When we cast those instants and sorceries, they're going to be doing a little bit of damage around the table.
There's a really cool new version of this from the Lord of the Rings set that's an enchantment, which I think is really cool.
I did see that.
Fiery Inscription, I think it's called.
It's got another line of text on there somewhere, doesn't it? What's the other thing that it does?
I'm not entirely sure. Might do something with the ring tempting you.
I think it might do something like that.
But it's an enchantment version of Gutter Snipe, and Gutter Snipe has been a staple in Commander for a long time.
Yeah.
So having an enchantment version, pretty good.
Well, harder to remove, for sure. And my weird pick from this deck is Sardian Avenger. This is a 1/1 for 1 and a red. It's a Goblin Warrior with First Strike and Trample. It's a 1/1. When it attacks, it gets +X/+O until end of turn, where X is the number of artifacts your opponents control. And whenever an artifact an opponent controls is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, Sardian Avenger deals 1 damage to that player. So this is the ultimate anti-treasure tech.
Wow.
This came out in the Brothers War Commander decks. I think this is in the Mishra Precon. I love it. I think it's so fun. And this checks how many artifacts your opponents control, plural.
Oh, so even if you're not... Like, it doesn't just care about the person it's attacking.
Nope.
It cares about everybody.
Everybody.
Wow,
So it doesn't check yours,
huge.
but yeah, if you, James, have 5 artifacts and player 3's got 4 and the other player's got 4, then I'm adding, 13... It gets +13.
But it's also
+0.
First Strike Trample.
Yeah.
So if it's 13-1, who cares about the 1 toughness? It's going to kill the block before it even
And
gets
deal
a chance.
damage over the top.
That's sick. I
It's
love this card.
so fun.
I don't think I've actually seen this hit the battlefield playing against Wart against you.
Well...
Is this a new include?
It's fairly new, but also importantly, what is a deck I don't play very often? So I would like to ask you, what is this deck like to play against?
Well, yeah, I can see why you don't like playing against it, because we've spoken about decks that spin their wheels a lot, and I think this is definitely one of them. When it pops off, it looks incredible. Like you're creating, if you go Brightstone Ritual and then copy it, you're generating like more mana than any ritual spell you could possibly ask for. It's insane, but sometimes you are digging and digging and digging for like a way to win the game.
Yeah.
I'm kind of thinking maybe the way to make this deck better is to include like more win cons. I'm not sure how many like you would say you're running, like how many you've got tagged in Moxfield that say win con. But like I remember like one example for when we were at a game store in Melbourne called Plenty of Games. We were in a game and you were spinning your wheels for ages and ages and ages, and then you were like, oh, I think I can get there. I just don't know how. So you kept doing it. We literally put our cards down, face down on the table. I think I got a drink and we sat there for a while. And then you were like, all right, I'm doing it. I'm casting Final Fortune, which is a sorcery where you take an extra turn. It's 2 red mana.
It's actually instant.
Is it instant?
You can take an extra turn, like, between 2 other players.
That's wild. But at the crux of this spell is at the end of that turn, you lose the game.
This card's gotten a lot more expensive recently since Obeka got printed, because this is a classic example of one of those effects that says, at the beginning of the end step, lose the game, where you can tap Obeka and end your turn, and you won't lose the game.
Yeah, so you bypass that delayed trigger, which is insane.
Straight up take an extra turn.
But like you took an extra turn, and you took another probably 10 to 13 minute turn, and then you did win the game.
No, I didn't.
Did you not win the game?
I lost that game.
Oh my god. I think I might have just blacked out, to be honest.
There was so much happening, but no, I just
That makes my point even stronger.
Yeah.
I think this deck just spins its wheels until it feels like a car in mud.
It's definitely a boom and bust kind of thing.
A glass cannon, for sure.
Definitely a glass cannon deck. Yeah, and that's my main reason I don't play it very often, is if Ward gets removed, I'm just like, cool. What am I doing? I have no idea.
Are you running a lot of protection in the deck?
I've added a bit more in the last couple of weeks because I've noticed that she just gets removed all the time. But it needs probably more again, to be honest.
Yeah. I think also for 6 mana, it feels really bad casting your commander for the second time for 8. For the third time for 10.
Yeah.
Like it gets like 6 mana is like that commander slot. And I was talking about this with my partner the other day who has an Asterion deck. They hate having to cast Asterion for 8.
Yeah.
So they're tearing it down and making a Norzov commander very similar, but it's 3 mana commander.
Yep, I think I was talking to them about this the other day as well. So, the verdict on Wart. While goblins are one of my favourite creature types, and this deck gets to play some of my favourite weirdos, it's very prone to interruption, see the Glass Cannon episode, and it sits at a very awkward power level. It's too sensitive to removal to be really powerful, but maybe too explosive for really casual tables. So, consequently, I don't pull it out very often. Wart is a D.
What a D. Yeah, look... My partner has explicitly said, I think when you built this deck, you were playing a lot with my partner.
They unfortunately had to suffer through like 2 to 3 games, and I think they were the first 2 to 3 games with the deck.
And I think they were probably the first to be very honest with you and said, not again. I'm not feeling this.
Yeah, they said like maybe play it at a higher powered Walt, and I was like, totally respect that. The next deck I'd like to talk about is my Crack the Thumbless and Achroma Vision of Ixidor deck.
Now, this deck, fun little side story, I wasn't allowed to see the commanders of this deck when I first played against it. I had to guess what the commanders were, and I failed miserably, because this deck does not do what you think it does.
No, it's, yeah, you'll see in a sec, but basically, Crack the Thumbless, we've all seen him before. He's a 2/2 Goblin Wizard for 1 and a red. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, flip a coin. If you lose the flip, return that spell to its owner's hand. If you win the flip, copy that spell, and you may choose new targets for the copy. It's got Partner, so this is definitely a spell slingery kind of card, typically. And the other commander is a Achroma Vision of Ixidor for 5 white. You get a 6/6 angel with flying, first strike, vigilance, and trample. At the beginning of each combat until end of turn, each other creature you control gets +1/+1 if it has flying, +1/+1 if it has first strike, and so on, which I love that it says and so on.
And so on.
For double strike, death touch, haste, etc. Pretty much all of the keywords. So, Kraken Achroma, or Krakroma, as I affectionately call it, is a goofy Boros polymorph list with only 6 creatures that tries to find either Zada or Mirrorwing Dragon and make an extraordinary number of tokens, then storm off for the win with a bunch of pump spells, that kind of thing. So yeah, it's a polymorph list. So the key cards, one of them is going to be Chaotic Transformation. This is a typical polymorph effect. I'll read it so you understand just exactly what a polymorph effect is. You exile up to 1 target artifact, up to 1 target creature, up to 1 target enchantment, up to 1 target planeswalker, and up to 1 target land. And for each permanent exiled this way, its controller reveals cards from the top of their library until they reveal a card that shares a card type with it, and then they put that card onto the battlefield. So the main thing you're doing here is you're exiling a token creature that you control, and then you're revealing cards until you reveal one of those 6 creatures in the deck that you really want to get out. And because there's so few creatures in the deck, you get that card all the time. This is what they call a polymorph.
Yeah,
list.
named after the actual spell polymorph, which is blue, which doesn't exist in this deck.
No.
It's Boros.
No.
Most polymorph decks in Commander are blue because there's more polymorph effects in blue.
Yes.
But of course, you had to do it in Boros.
I had to. So the other key card in this deck is Angel Fire Ignition. If I can find it in my list here, just 1 second. Where is it? It's run away from me. There it is.
Fire Ignition.
It's
1
a sorcery.
red and a white.
1 red and a white. It's a sorcery. It says put 2/+1 counters on target creature. It gains vigilance, trample, lifelink, indestructible, and haste until end of turn. And it has flashback for 2 red and a white. So basically the way this deck is trying to do it is it gets Mirrorwing Dragon or Zada Hedron Grinder out that says when you cast an instant or sorcery spell that targets this creature, you copy it for each other creature you control, basically. So Angel Fire Ignition just puts all the keywords on that creature, puts 2 counters on it, and when you cast that on Mirrorwing Dragon, it's going to do the same thing for every other creature on your board.
And then that is enhanced by Achroma, Vision of Ixidor, because she buffs for however many keywords the creatures have. So this is like the actual, like if you combine this with a chroma can be a finisher in this deck.
Yeah.
And it's meant to be.
Yeah, so you don't cast a chroma very often, but when you do, it's supposed to end the game.
Yeah.
On the spot. The weird pick here, I tried to find a bunch of ways to put creatures back into my library so I could polymorph into them. I don't know why I thought that would be a good idea, but I did. Fire Prophecy, for 1 and a red, is an instant that says, deals 3 damage to target creature. You may put a card from your hand on the bottom of your library. If you do, draw a card. So there's 2 reasons this is good in the deck. One is that it puts a creature back in the library.
So if you draw your opening hand and it has like Zada or Mirrorwing, which is like 5 mana, and you're like, I could polymorph into it for cheaper.
Yeah.
You put that onto the bottom of the library, right?
But the other thing you can do is once you're storming off and you've made like a bunch of really, really huge creatures with Zada or Mirrorwing Dragon, you can actually Fire Prophecy one of your own creatures and make it Mirrorwing Dragon, and you'll copy it for each other creature you control, because it's a spell that's targeting only that creature. So
you draw a heap of cards.
So you'll put a card on the bottom of your hand and draw a card however many times you want.
That's kind of sick.
10 times. Effectively, you're not drawing cards because you're going neutral on cards.
Yeah, but you self-wheel in a weird way.
Yeah, you sculpt your hand.
Yeah, very much sculpting your hand. That's sick.
It's so strange, but I love it. What's this like in a game to play against, James? Crochroma.
Look, I mean, the deck, I'm not sure if it still exists, but on EDHREC, if you look up this partner pairing...
I checked before this episode.
I think still...
There's 2 decks, and one of them is mine.
This is one of 2 partner pairings of Krakenachroma. If you are the other person that has the Krakenachroma list... We'd like to interview you and talk about your list.
The deck is very different, and I know because when you go on EDHREC, cards will only have that they are in either 100% of decks or 50% of decks. So if I look at a card and it's not mine and it says 50% of decks, I'm like, cool, that's in the other one.
Whoever's got the other one is running this. That's interesting.
Yeah.
You could probably make their list just by going through EDHREC.
Just about, yeah.
But I think that this deck, personally, it feels like an experiment. It feels like you were tinkering with this really wacky idea, which it is, like polymorphing in Boros to then go really wide in tokens, to then mad buff and like overrun effects with a commander as your overwhelming stampede type effect. It feels really... And we've talked about this a lot on the podcast, where we should avoid cards. When we talk about it in the context of deck building, when we say this card is great, if this, then this, and also this.
Only in this super narrow scenario is it good.
Yeah, you're a huge hypocrite. This deck is that sentence. It's like, if I cast Kraken, if I manage to copy a big token thing, I get a lot of tokens. And then if I manage to polymorph into one of my Mirrorwing Dragons or Zada, I can create like a big board, and then if I manage to get enough instant spells that give keywords, then if I cast a chroma, then I win the game. Well, how often do you win with this deck?
It's so rare. And to be honest, that's what it's like to pilot, it's just like either I do actual nothing.
Well, like I've watched
you just cast the same spell again and again. Krak returns it to my hand, returns it to my hand.
It's so sad to watch sometimes. It's like Walt will be sat there flipping a coin and just be like, flip, heads. It's tails. Pass. Yeah. I'm like, cool, you tapped all your mana and didn't do anything. Congratulations.
I've adjusted the line of thinking that leads to me playing this deck. It used to be something like, ooh, maybe I'll pop off. And now it's like, ooh, I'd like to watch everyone else play Magic.
I'd like to be a spectator.
I'd like to take a break from thinking. I'm just going to play this deck where I'll make a bunch of game actions and do nothing.
Interesting. I'm glad you feel the same as us watching it, because we take a lot of pity on you when we watch you play this.
I think I really like what you said, which is that it feels like an experiment to play against, because this was a blast to build. As a deck, getting this right, this was probably in my peak of obsessively deck building, of going like, how can I make this work? Like, swap these 5 cards out, put these 5 cards in, playtest on Moxfield, again.
It's such a unique idea. Like, I have never seen anyone with a list like this.
And it feels really cool in that way, especially when it works and people are like, wow, good stuff. Like, that's wild. But yeah, it's so inconsistent that I can't say that I truly enjoy playing it.
Yeah, that's fair. Because, like, look, the 99% of the time when the deck is working, it's usually because you have Feather on board, and you're using Feather as your target for these spells, and you get them back to hand. And like,
We actually don't need to target Feather, which is a really good... So
Yeah.
Feather and Mirrorwing Dragon's a busted combo, because you're going target Mirrorwing Dragon, bounce to
exile,
your hand. Yeah.
That's insane. I just think that, like, if you wanted to run a deck like this, where you're casting lots of instant spells to buff a creature, and you could run Mirrorwing Dragon and Zada, you would probably want to run a Feather list more.
Yeah.
This is just an objectively worse partner pairing, making it weird and wacky. But I think that it's such a you build. Like,
Yeah.
If you could build a Feather deck, but that's boring, you could just go on EDH Rec and there are hundreds and thousands of Feather decks. There are 2 Kraken Chroma lists.
Yeah.
And one of them is yours.
Yeah, and that's, to be honest, I did think about building Feather, and I was like, no, I want something weird instead. And so I was glad I built it, but
Fair enough.
Yeah. So the verdict. Similar to Wart, this is a deck that cannot compete with any heavily optimized lists, but always has the potential to go off in a single turn, which is sort of that contradiction like I spoke about. When it works, and I have a blast counting mana until I reached lethal. But the rest of the time, this deck does absolutely nothing. So Chroma is a D.
Good. We're off to a flying start here. 2 Ds already.
I have a sneaking suspicion that I might have done some forward thinking and gone from worst to best.
I'll save the
here.
best. This is like eating the veggies and saving that, like, you know, potato and mashed gravy.
Yeah, exactly.
Did
right.
I say potatoes and mashed gravy?
Yes, you did.
Yeah. Well, that's that. This is the next deck.
You know what's even more embarrassing is that I was just like, maybe that's an English thing. Maybe I just don't know what it is. Potatoes and mashed gravy. I was like, oh man, all these stories James tells about being back in England sound like a different world.
I love bangers and mashed gravy with some mushy peas. Mushy peas is actually a real thing.
Mushy
though.
sausage and mashed gravy.
and some banging potato.
Banging potato. See, that sounds good. Someone rocks up at a party and is like, hey, I brought the banging potato. And you're like,
bring it on.
Cool.
I don't care
Get
what
it in
form.
me.
Fries, curly fries, if it's in mashed form, waffle fries, I don't care.
It'll bang you.
Potato bake, bring it on.
Exactly right. Let's go to the next deck. The next deck is my one and only CDH deck. It's
right.
Yasharn Implacable Earth. So Yasharn is a 4-mana 4/4. So for 2 green white, you get a legendary creature, Elemental Boar.
Often referred to as a hate boar, by
Hate
the
Boar,
way.
yeah, it's cute. When Yasharn enters the battlefield, search your library for a basic forest card and a basic plains card. Reveal those cards, put them into your hand, then shuffle your library. That seems pretty bad. Oh, it's got more text on it. Players can't pay life or sacrifice non-land permanents to cast spells or activate abilities. So this is basically what the whole deck is built around. This turns off fetch lands, it turns off treasure tokens, and a bunch of other strategies that are seeing a lot of play in CDH.
It silver bullets so many decks.
Yeah.
So many decks. Like, I mean, like, if you're on Crick, it's silver bullets Crick.
Yeah, you just can't do it.
Yeah, this deck is very, very oppressive.
So Yasharn is a CDH stacks deck that tries to prevent the table from storming off with a variety of hate bears, including the hate boar, but primarily the one in the command zone, while it smacks combo decks in the face until they die. So this is kind of like one of those quote win conless stacks decks. It does have the Heliod and Walking Ballista infinite combo in there.
Where you can put counters and, like, infinitely
Gain
ping
lifelink,
people.
ping people till they die. But you so rarely win with that. Most of the time you're just trying to stack people out until they can't do anything, and then you're literally just swinging for combat damage every turn until the people die. So 2 of the key cards, we have Sareth the Viper's Fang. So this is a really important protection piece in the deck. So it's a 4-mana creature that says other tapped creatures you control have Death Touch, and other untapped creatures you control have Hexproof. You can also pay 1 and tap it to untap a target creature or land you control. You know, you're very rarely going to do that. It's mostly the giving stuff Hexproof.
I mean, you could respond with something being targeted and
It's
untap
true.
it to make it hexproof. That's pretty cool.
You do also have Gaia's Cradle in the deck, I've just realized. So you can actually untap Gaia's Cradle with
Whoa.
this. That would be pretty wild to do. Another key card in the deck, like a lot of stacks lists in CDH, it's playing Elish Norn Grand Cenobite. This is the 7-mana Praetor for... It's a 4/7 with Vigilance. It says other creatures you control get +2/+2. Creatures your opponents control get -2/-2. This is like a Wrath in
It kills
CDH.
pretty much everything in CDH. The
Yeah.
only thing it doesn't kill, annoyingly, is the Draneth Magistrate, the 1/3.
Yeah.
It doesn't kill a Draneth, which
Friggin' Draneth
Yeah.
Magistrate.
you run in this list.
I don't know what you're talking about.
It's right there. I can see it.
Yeah. It's a stacks deck. It's like the one place it belongs. It would be my argument.
I agree. It is very oppressive, this stacks list.
It definitely is. The weird pick is harder. I didn't build this deck, by the way. This is straight from the CDH database. I'll pick a card that's old. It's not that weird. Root Maze is an enchantment for a green that says all artifacts and lands enter the battlefield tapped.
Oh, all lands.
Yeah.
I don't think I've seen you cast this.
I
It's also $6, which is not bad.
No. So I played this in the CDH tournament that we hosted at the game store that we play at. And I had a turn 1 Root Maze. And it was very funny because literally as we sat down, Ellie, who's our judge who we chat at all the time, and also just a great Magic player, Ellie was like, oh, cool. And like looked at my commander and was like, oh, so what kind of deck can I expect here? Probably like a turn 1 Root Maze kind of deck.
She called it?
She called it. And I literally cast a
yeah.
Root Maze and she was like,
I predicted your opening hand.
Yeah. There was a, what's it called? Turns. What's the infinite turns? Teddy over turns list.
Oh, that's stupid.
It's like all fetch lands
Yep.
because you have to, because they draw you cards.
Yep.
And that player was very sad.
I'm not shocked.
Root Maze came down.
Making everything slow as hell.
Well, like, the usual fetch land into, like, untapped dual land, like a, tropical island or whatever, becomes tapped fetch land, untap, crack fetch land,
Get
tapped
tropical
island.
basically a guild gate at this point.
Slower than a guild gate.
Yeah.
Tap land into tap land. So what's this like to play against in a game, James?
Look, I play CDH lists. My one and only CDH list that I have is my Niv Mizzet Curiosity Control combo list. Now, it's control, but it wants to win as quickly as possible. The control pieces are in there to, like, protect it popping off super quick.
Yep.
There is a bunch of fast mana acceleration. There's a dockside's in the deck, obviously. So this deck, like, if you get your Shan out, I am really struggling to spin any kind of wheel, let alone win. But, like, look, it's really interesting. I find that the Yashan list is really, really oppressive, even though it's not considered anymore the top tier white-green stacks list.
No, it's mostly the Dulcim. I think it's got an actual Magic printing now, but it's the original
Street
printing.
Fighter Secret Lair.
Yeah, the original printing is from Street Fighter, and that goes the other way in the command zone, where it's not a hate bear, it's your card draw. Because actually card draw in a stacks list is really important, because mostly you're just emptying your hand of stacks pieces.
Putting 1/1s, 2/2s onto the battlefield.
Yeah, and you don't care about drawing cards because you're just trying to stacks out the table, but yeah, that basically draws you cards when your creatures do combat damage to players.
With creatures with reach, specifically, I think.
No, it has a line of text to untap creatures with reach, but I think it just straight up says, do combat damage to a player, draw a card.
That's insane. I just think that, like, that is objectively better to run because you can draw so many more cards and deploy so many more hate bears.
And you can have Yashan in the 99.
And I think Yashan does go in the 99 for sure.
Yeah, probably.
Probably. It turns off treasures and like gets you 2 lands. It's not bad.
No.
But I think that this list hits so hard because the commander is so oppressive to pretty much every CDH list.
Yeah.
I think that the fact that you can't pay life and you can't sacrifice things is 2 of the most relevant keywords on a CDH commander, because every CDH deck somehow gets treasures, somehow pays life.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's so relevant, and I think even though it's like not the meta, I think that this deck is still really strong, and I'm looking forward to seeing this in another tournament setting.
Well, it's not. I agree. It's not the top deck anymore. Like, it's not the best stacks deck probably out there, but it's still in the database, so it's still considered like up there
for sure. And it still has an updated primer and all that kind of stuff.
It's still being updated as well, which is the really important thing. Once there's a list in the CDH database, when it stops getting updated, that's usually a sign it's about to fall off, or like the 2 things are related. In terms of piloting this myself, I enjoy it. It's the only way I can see myself realistically wanting to play CDH.
It's full blown stacks.
Just white green creature stuff. I don't know. I find that so enjoyable. The main thing is I just don't play enough CDH to really appreciate the deck.
Yeah. Because there's a lot of cards in this list that are proxied.
Yeah. The whole deck.
The whole deck is proxied,
except for Yashan and what's the 3-mana flash it in when creatures players search their libraries, they search the top 4 instead?
Oh, Aven Mind Sensor.
Aven Mind Sensor. Yeah. So those are the only real cards.
That's funny. Deck. But look, like, we're like, if you want to, like, if you go onto the Moxfield list and have a look at Walt's Yashan list, Walt does not own what's the price on Moxfield? It's like $4,200. Walt does not own this.
No.
We're supporting proxies.
Yeah.
If you want to proxy a deck to have fun, that's fine. I'm sure you're supporting Magic the Gathering in other ways.
Yeah, 100%. This deck is actually not on my Moxfield because I felt it was disingenuous to put my name next to a deck I had no say in.
That's fair.
So if you would like to look at the deck, I'd recommend going to the CDH database and looking up Yashan.
It's the exact same.
There's been a few updates recently that I haven't kept up with, so that's why they're not in my deck.
Yeah.
So yeah, if anything, that deck is better.
We'll link that list in the show notes then.
Yeah,
we'll do that. Yeah.
So the verdict on this deck, this is a CDH list directly from the CDH database, and it plays like one. It's efficient, streamlined, and resilient, but without any creative input from me, it's not a deck that I get very excited to play. I also just don't get the urge to play CDH all that often, so this deck frequently gathers dust. Yashan is a D.
Third D in a row. We're going well.
I suspect that'll be the last of the Ds, looking down at the list a bit here, because the next deck we have is my Estrid the Masked deck.
Which we've spoken about a few times recently.
Well, this is a recent build, for sure. This is a... it's a Planeswalker that can be your commander. It has that line of text on it. For 1 green, white, blue, so it's a Bant color identity. It's a Planeswalker that enters with 3 loyalty. You can uptick 2 loyalty counters to untap each enchanted permanent you control. You can downtick by 1 to create a 1/1 aura enchantment token named Mask attached to another target permanent. The token has enchant permanent and totem armor. That's the important bit. And you can remove 7 loyalty counters to put the top 7 cards of your library into your graveyard. Return all non-aura enchantment cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. Then do the same for aura cards.
That happens.
It's happened a couple of times now. So Estrid is a streamlined Bant enchantments deck that tries to make a few creatures very, very large and simultaneously build an enormous prison around itself so that opponents have no way to stop the deck from going off. A couple of key cards. We have Dawn's Reflection. This is a 4-mana aura that enchants a land, and it says whenever the enchanted land is tapped for mana, its controller adds 2 mana in any combination of colors to their mana pool. So the tech with Estrid on this one is Estrid's uptick untaps each enchanted permanent you control, which includes your land. So I have basically every relevant one of these land auras in the deck.
This is a great example of like choosing cards that synergize with your commander for deck building. There are no mana dogs in this deck. Not one.
Nope.
Because it's bad. It's like objectively bad to run them.
Although actually, now I think about
Unless you enchant them and then they untap.
I wonder if there are any enchantment creatures that are dorks. Because if there were, that would actually be pretty good because you would untap...
And it gives you something to enchant.
Yeah, you would untap the enchanted permanent. And so it would be... But I don't know.
Worth a Scryfall search.
Yeah,
but like, this is a great example. Like, this is an aura that goes on a land and synergizes with your commander. This is good ramping.
Oh, yeah. A lot of the time, I can cast Estrid and in that same turn end up, like, uptick Estrid and have as much mana as I had before I cast Estrid.
Usually more.
Yeah.
Like, because, I've seen you cast Estrid and then deploy a board state.
Yeah, after Estrid, same turn, 100%. Another key card in the deck, this is just a classic example of that prison thing I was talking about. Solitary Confinement. For 2 and a white, you get an enchantment that says at the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice Solitary Enchantment unless you discard a card. Skip your draw step. Seems pretty bad so far. You have Shroud.
There's a good line.
And prevent all damage that would be dealt to you.
So even combat damage, not non-combat damage, just damage.
Yep. So the tech here is you have a bunch of Enchantress effects on the battlefield. Whenever you cast an enchantment, draw a card. So that skipping your draw step doesn't matter. Discarding a card in your upkeep doesn't matter. And then, you just straight up, it's so hard to die with this on the battlefield. Yeah,
this card has definitely protected your life total so many times.
I really enjoy it. I think it's a lot better than people might give it credit for. The weird pick in this deck is just a classic example of how I like to do even really well-known archetypes like auras and stuff. Heavenly Blademaster is an angel for 5 and a white. It's a 3/6 with flying and double strike. It says when it enters the battlefield, you may attach any number of auras and equipment you control to it. And other creatures you control get +1/+1 for each aura and equipment attached to Heavenly Blademaster.
Oh my lord.
So this is like my overrun effect.
Hell,
in
on
the deck.
one creature.
Yeah, you just chuck like 4 auras on there. Creatures you control get +4/+4. Seems pretty good. What's this like to play against in a game, James?
Well, this is probably one of the most recent decks I've played against you. We were in the game store the other night and we played it. And out of nowhere, I got swung at with an unblockable 30-30, like, just out of the blue. To be fair, the Planeswalker was about to ultimate. It was on board, all of us saw it. I, however, was playing a deck that... I think I was playing my Zaxara list. I was trying to get a board state to kind of protect myself and even get ready for my own overwhelming stampede, kill everyone kind of thing.
Yep. I also had a Sphere of Safety on the battlefield, which is the only one of these kind of can't attack me unless you pay X sort of effects that cares about your Planeswalkers.
Yes,
so
can't attack a Planeswalker.
Yeah, so attacking my Planeswalkers, I think at the time would have cost an extra 3 mana.
Which at the time, I think I only had, like... 5-6 mana.
Yeah.
And I think what I did is I cast maybe a Genesis Wave and got something onto the battlefield. And then after it, I was like, oh, I could have swung at you. And I was like, oh, wait, no, that was before I cast this spell.
Yeah.
I didn't have anything on the battlefield then.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there was nothing I could do, I think. Maybe if we rewound the footage and had a look, maybe there was a play.
I had a blocker, and I think you actually didn't have many creatures without Summoning Sickness.
No.
To be honest, there was only one player who I thought fully misplayed, and it was a player who had like an 8/8 flyer. I think it was Razaketh or one of those huge demons.
Yeah.
And he had a fair bit of mana as well. So he probably should have paid. I think I asked him after the game and he was like, oh, I sort of thought I probably had the win on my next turn if I kept just like playing things from my hand, which is fair enough. But yeah, that let me win, I think.
Yeah, well, ultimating that Planeswalker just wins so quickly. But I've seen you build a few different enchantment lists. This one's the most fun to play against. I found your original Bant enchantment deck was Tavasa.
Which is very Voltron.
And it kills people so quickly.
Yeah.
Like, it is not hard to get Tavasa up to 21 commander damage super quick. Sisay was very oppressive and always found the perfect card every time because it's a tutor in the command zone.
We talked about the tutor in the command zone effect of how it limits your deck building by making you just have every card in your deck is kind of in your hand.
Yeah, and also, like, it was very much more prison effects that weren't, like, play aroundable, if that's a adjective.
That's fair. No, there's a couple of like can't cast more than one spell a turn sort of effects.
Yeah, and like creatures can't come back from the graveyard or something like that. This deck is very much like I'm just pillow forting myself. If you want to do your own thing, you can. You just can't do it at me.
Yeah,
they're the stacks effects that are in this list, and I actually think that that's like a much softer stacks. But yeah, this deck is fun to play against. It's very interactive. It does a big thing, and it's still, like, you ultimated that Planeswalker, and that game went on for, like, another 40 minutes. Because, like, I died, I sat there and watched the rest of the game, but it was, like, another 40 minutes after ultimating a Planeswalker.
Yeah.
So it's not like ultimate, I win.
No.
It's, there's still ways to play into it.
Yeah, definitely. In terms of me piloting it, I will say it's a deck that feels like it just plays the best cards in your hand. There's not really many decision trees. There's not really top points where you kind of go like, oh, I can either go down this route or this route. It's kind of more like, oh, I have an Enchantress. I should play that first. Okay, I've got these 2 enchantments. I'll play those 2. Okay,
draw
pass
2
the turn.
cards. Yeah.
Yeah. It's very like the cards sort of play themselves, and it's almost exclusively at sorcery speed. The best part of that game, when we played it, was actually when I resolved and flipped the new Heliod that gives your spells flash.
And makes them cheaper for every card that your opponents have drawn this turn, which is sick.
So it's really, really cool card. That was when I started having a blast in that game because I was like, oh, I can have answers.
Yeah.
And they can be enchantments. Because, the rest of the time it's kind of like, just play it in your hand. It's not saying it's terrible. It's just not a deck that fills you with excitement of going like, oh my god, what am I going to do next? Like some of the other ones I'll talk about a bit later.
I feel like this deck would be great to give a beginner. Like, and
that's
say,
fair.
Here's a deck that you can play that I've built that's not a precon. It's powerful, but it's very, like, you'll read it and you'll go, yeah, I get how this deck works.
Yeah. That's probably true. I think probably the only unintuitive thing about that is the, like, choosing the right ability with the Planeswalker can be a tough decision sometimes. But yeah, I think otherwise it is pretty straightforward.
I think 90% of the time, though, you're going to want to untap all your enchanted permanents because that's going to give you, like, it's like a ramp spell.
Yeah.
And then you cast more enchantments that protect you more to draw you more cards with enchantress effects.
Yeah.
I feel like even if you just say, if you don't want to really protect one thing with the mask, with the aura,
just always uptick.
Untap your enchanted lands.
That's true. Maybe I'll have to pass off to a new player.
Yeah, we'll see what happens.
Well, the verdict. Estrid is very by the numbers. There aren't many cards in here that you wouldn't expect to see in an enchantments list, and that feels a little bit stale to me. The deck has one strategy, and it plays it well, which has its appeal next to the previous couple of decks with their wild inconsistency. But I may need to find a niche strategy to lean into to really make this deck feel creative. Until then, it's a fun deck, but not a blast, and for that reason, it's a C.
Moving up the ladder now.
Yes, we're out of that D tier. We're up into the decks that are just okay.
Just fine.
Yeah.
Like them. We enjoy them.
We enjoy them. They're not bad. Next one on the list, Averna, the Chaos Bloom. This is a 4/2 Elemental Shaman for green, blue, red. So the color identity here is Temur. As you cascade, you may put a land card from among the exiled cards onto the battlefield, tapped. The reminder text here says, do this after the last card is exiled, but before deciding whether to cast a non-land card.
So this has a land enter the battlefield in between the stack.
It's so strange. I've had to ask so many judge calls as to how I resolve like landfall abilities. I'm always like, where do the landfall abilities go on the stack?
Where do they go in the stack? Because I'm assuming when the land enters, they trigger and go above.
They do.
Yeah, okay.
So
cool.
the thing I had to learn is that like things on. Anyway, no, that might be wrong.
Shout out to our last episode about confusing rules.
I need to sit down with a judge and just be like, okay, walk me through exactly where the triggers go, because if I can visualize it on the stack, I think it'll be fine. But yeah, Averna is a strong cascade/landfall deck that tries to get every single land in the library onto the battlefield and win with powerful creatures and overrun effects. A couple of key cards. Emoti, Celebrant of Bounty, is kind of the secret commander of the deck. This is the way that I cascade most of the time. It's a 5-mana 3/1 Naga Druid with Cascade, and it says spells you cast with mana value 6 or greater have Cascade. So this deck is full of big, fat creatures, so that Emoti can cascade with them. It actually has probably one of the higher tutor counts in all of my decks because I need to find Emoti so that the rest of the deck kind of works.
Makes sense.
Another one of the key cards. It's so good in every Cascade deck. I'm mostly just bragging about the fact that I actually justified the amount of money to buy it. It's Apex Devastator!
You actually bought this?
I did, off Nick. Nick had a copy and I was like, I need to get one. For 8 green, it's a 10/10 with Cascade, 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 Cascade.
And all that, that it's not just like you cast this and you cascade before it hits the battlefield 4 times.
It's so silly.
It's insanity. What I'm really curious about this deck, when you're talking about the mana curve, because that Apex Devastator is 10 mana. The mana curve of this deck,
it's very high,
is just astronomical. I'm looking at the graph now. Like 6 and 5 drops are about as high as 4 drops.
Yeah, there's actually more 5 drops than 4 drops looking at it here.
That's crazy.
The average mana value of this deck is 4.26, by the way. So that should tell you just how high of a curve it is. But you're ramping, so it makes sense. The weird pick of this deck actually kind of goes hand in hand with Emoti. But also has some other upside. It's Momir Vig, Simic Visionary. This is a 5-mana 2/2 creature that says whenever you cast a green creature spell, you can search your library for a green creature card and reveal it. If you do, shuffle your library, then put that card on top. And whenever you cast a blue creature spell, reveal the top card of your library. If it's a creature card, put that card into your hand.
Wow.
So the tech here is that early game, you're just tutoring Emoti every time. You just get Emoti, put it on top of your library, draw it. And then in the late game, when you're casting green creature spells and stuff, if they have Cascade, I believe, I may be mistaken here, but I believe you can stack the triggers so that above the Cascade trigger, you put the Momir Vig trigger to tutor a creature card to the top of your library, and then you can Cascade into it from the Cascade trigger. Assuming that the spell you're casting is a creature, but it's a high chance in a deck like this.
Yeah, that's really sick. Mogmir is a cast trigger, so I think that would work.
I think so, because Cascade is also a cast trigger.
Yeah.
So I think you can just stack them because you control both triggers. But
we'll check with the judge after this, I think.
Yeah. I'd love to say how amazing this card has been. Sadly, it's just one of those, you know, in every deck you have that card you just never see. So Momir Vig, I've yet to resolve onto a battlefield. I don't know why, you just never see it. Doesn't happen.
Well, look, to play against this deck, it's really interesting because on record, both of us have said that Cascade is a mechanic that we hate playing against.
Yep. For good reason.
I actually don't mind playing against this list as much because most Cascade lists, because you're running a Verna, which is actually like the land thing. You've got a lot of landfall in your deck. Like you've got, Rampaging Baloths, you've got like a lot of those you've got ways to create tokens or get value from lands hitting the battlefield. Mm-hmm. So your focus is really getting lands, not casting and cascading a billion spells.
Yeah.
Most Cascade lists do that. So usually when you play against Cascade, you watch someone play Solitaire for 20 minutes. Usually you cascade and it resolves pretty quickly.
Yeah.
You're not usually cascading into something else that has Cascade or something like that, unless you're really winning the game.
Yeah.
And I also like the fact that this deck has like a really key win con with the landfall stuff, with making putting +1 counters on stuff, making big 3/3 beast with trample, whatever. It's got a win con. It gets to where it wants to be. This is a Cascade list that I'm never like, oh god, I'm going to watch someone play Magic for 20 minutes.
I'm actually really, really relieved to hear that because I set out to build a deck like that. I really was like, what do I not like about Cascade? Okay, let's not do that.
Yeah.
So I didn't include cards like what's the 6-mana enchantment that kind of cascades? Doesn't say
Sunbird's Invocation.
Yeah, I don't play Sunbird's Invocation because I think that card is silly and takes way too long to resolve.
Do you play Wild Magic Sorcerer? You do.
I do.
Yeah. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
So that means you cascade, like, what that says is the first spell you cast from exile has Cascade.
Yes.
So that limits it to the first spell as well. So it only triggers when you cascade and you exile a spell from your library to cast. That also has Cascade.
Yeah.
But then it stops. It doesn't just keep going and going and going.
It's just that single time that it does it. Yeah. In terms of piloting this deck, for me, the deck just has good cards in it. And there's something fun about that. Like, it just feels like playing out like a really busted number of amazing cards, which is cool.
Well, I mean, you splashed a bit of cash on the Apex Devastator. So.
Yeah. It's like, I splashed a little bit in a few different parts of this deck, and I also just owned a bunch of cards that were already good in it.
Yeah.
But
Commander Legends had a lot of these cards. We drafted a lot of Commander Legends.
Yes.
So.
But yeah, like when a deck just has good cards in it, I don't tend to get that excited about the creativity of playing it.
That's fair.
It's almost a bit similar to the last deck, actually, where good cards are so good that they kind of feel like they play themselves a lot of the time.
I feel like we've done an episode on this.
Yeah, good cards are holding you back. Go back and listen to it. But yes, that's sort of my main drawback to this deck, is it does just feel not that creative.
Fair enough. Yeah.
So the verdict. Averna is a powerful deck that gets to do some weird things, but mostly it's playing the landfall cards you've seen everywhere else, and it doesn't get me super excited. When it comes out, it's fun, but it rarely wins the battle to come out of the box when it's put next to the other decks in my collection. So Averna is a C.
All right. Fair enough.
Yeah.
I really enjoy it, but I respect your decision.
Okay.
I respect that.
Cool. Next deck on my list. This is an oldie. This is the second Commander deck I ever built.
This is a lockdown creation.
Yeah. It's very different to how it used to be, so we'll go into that in a sec, but it's not a typical version of this list. It's Merrin of Clan Nel Toth. So it's a 3/4 for 2 black-green that says whenever another creature you control dies, you get an experience counter. At the beginning of your end step, choose target creature card in your graveyard. If that card's mana value is less than or equal to the number of experience counters you have, return it to the battlefield. Otherwise, put it into your hand. So just to lay that out a bit more, if creatures I control have died twice since Merrin's come out, I've got 2 experience counters. I move to my end step. I can choose a creature card in my graveyard. If it's a 2-drop or a 1-drop, straight back to the battlefield. Otherwise, it goes to my hand. Always in the end step you get something, but it depends how many experience counters you have as to whether it goes to battlefield or to hand.
It's one of the most played commanders of all time. It's really good.
It's really, really good for just doing the things that a lot of people like to play. So my Merrin list is a secret commander Gerard Golgari Lichlord deck. I'll read that card out in a sec. That tries to make a few huge creatures, then sacrifice them to train my opponents. So we'll go straight into Gerard so you can get an idea of what I'm talking about. So Gerard Golgari Lichlord, for black, green, you get a 2/2 that gets +1/+1 for each creature card in your graveyard. And it says, pay 1 black, green, sacrifice another creature. Each opponent loses life equal to the sacrificed creature's power. There's more text on that, doesn't matter. Basically you get Gerard out, you make something really, really big, you make something 10 power, 11 power, you pay 1 black, green, you sack that creature, each opponent loses 10 or loses 11.
Yeah. And as a secret commander, I'm actually going to shout out the last line of text on this card, where you can sacrifice a swamp and a forest and return Gerard from your graveyard to your hand, which in a secret commander list is pretty good. If someone gets rid of Merrin permanently with an oubliette or something like that,
true.
You can get Gerard back on himself, which is good.
That's true. That's true.
I don't think you've ever needed it, but
I've never needed it.
It's pretty good to have it there in case.
It's true. The other key card I'm going to shout out here, though, is one I talked about recently, which was a way of making sure I can win if Gerard's not there. It's important to keep that in mind. Giant Ankeg. I've yet to see anyone else play this creature. It's an 8 mana 8/8 with Trample and Ward 2 that says other creatures you control have Trample and Ward 2.
Giving everything Ward 2 is so strong.
It's like Ward reads as people, you sort of think to yourself like, no one's ever going to do that. You will be amazed how much of the time people forget to set aside that amount of mana.
Yep.
Or have that amount of mana up. Like they've got a 2 mana instant speed ready to respond on your end step before their turn or whatever. And then they go, oh crap, now that the Ward's there, can't do it anymore.
Yeah.
It's super relevant. The weird pick in this deck is just a classic example of the kind of card this deck loves, that no other deck likes very much. Daemogoth Titan for hybrid black-green, hybrid black-green, hybrid black-green, hybrid black-green.
Bless you.
4 mana, thank you. You get a 11/10 demon that says whenever Daemogoth Titan attacks or blocks, sacrifice a creature. So it's pretty bad. You don't want to be attacking or blocking with it, obviously. But a 4 mana 11/10 that you can sack to Gerard, that's pretty sweet.
That feels amazing.
What's this deck like to play against, James?
I actually really like watching this deck. I feel it's firstly it's unique for Merrin, because most Merrin decks are like Birthing Pod, Sporefrod loot decks, or something like that.
My earliest version of the deck was like that as well, as you'd remember.
Yeah, it had a lot of the Fleshbag Marauder, ETBs, everyone sacrifices a creature, which just wasn't fun to play against. This is fun now, because it's like, unique in that its power matters, so you freak out when you see, Daemogoth Titan hit the battlefield, because you're like, does he have Gerard and 3 extra mana? Because that's going to, drain us for 11.
Yeah.
There's also a lot of choice in this deck. At the beginning of every end step, you take a good 60 seconds, a full minute, and you go, what is my best choice here? What do I really want back? So I think I like seeing you play this, because as your friend, I like seeing you enjoy your deck and kind of be able to stretch your magic muscles a bit. Yeah.
Well, that's exactly what I love about the Merrin deck. Actually, it's funnily enough, is exactly that. It's the looking at my hand and looking at my graveyard, which is basically my hand as well, and going man, I have to really think about the sequence I want to do things in, but it's not like you look at that and go there's an objective right choice here. You have choices.
Yeah.
And there's actually totally valid reasons to go down the different paths you might choose. And that's a blast to play a deck like that. Once you're experienced at Magic, I will say, when you're new, it's probably better to play decks that kind of play themselves. But when you've been playing for a long time, these are the kind of decks you gravitate towards, I think. Are you the same?
For sure, 100%. I've piloted your Merrin deck a couple of times, and I really enjoy it, because you could have one board state for Merrin and 2 board states, you could have 3 opponents and their board state is one way, and you can have a decision tree for that, but then you can have 3 different opponents with the exact same Merrin board state, and your decision tree is completely different. You're I now need to go down this route. I also, the one tiny little criticism of this deck, and it's mainly a criticism of you, not the deck, just go to combat sometimes. You're so focused on the graveyard and bringing stuff back, you forget that you have a friggin' 11/11 that you can just freely swing.
I think you're referring to a specific spell table game. Yes.
You spent 15 minutes not realizing you had lethal on board.
So for reference, someone had exiled Gerard, so I couldn't win with Gerard. This is before I had the giant Ankeg effects in the deck, so I couldn't win that way. So I was how the hell am I going to win? So I had Sir Conrad out. So I was okay, this is my win card. I've just got to mill a bunch until we hit enough creatures to deal enough damage to win. I was sitting there in the tank for a good 10 minutes. It was a spell table game, and there were spectators. There were probably about 8 of us in the call.
I reckon it was more. I reckon we had probably about 6 or 7 spectators.
Yeah, it was a big crowd. I spent all this time looking at it, and then I was oh, go to combat, attack you for 5, now you lose.
Far out. Walt. Just go to combat.
I know, I forget. So the verdict with this deck is we're starting to get into decks I quite like now. This deck represents so many interesting decision trees, and for that reason, I find myself reaching for it when I feel like a challenging game. This revamped version of my old list is fresh and interesting, and not something I see other Commander players doing very much. Merrin is a good time, just not my favourite, so she's a B.
Fair call.
Okay.
Marin's sick. I love Marin.
It's tough putting decks in tiers.
It's like picking your favorite child. This must be challenging for you.
I like all my decks. I should have started with that. So even the ones I put in D, I still like those decks, and they might stick around for a while longer.
Yeah, you can't choose a favorite child.
No, it's impossible. My next deck is my Sir Gwyn Hero of Ashvale deck. So Sir Gwyn is a 5/5 with Vigilance and Menace for 3 red, white, black. So that's Mardu. Whenever an equipped creature you control attacks, you draw a card and you lose a life. And equipment you control have Equip Knight 0. So in other words, if you have a knight and you have Sir Gwyn, equipment you control, equip 2 knights for 0. Still sorcery speed, but for 0. So, Sir Gwyn is a Knights and Equipment deck with a Knights Vorthos theme. So every card in this deck should look like it is a knight, look like something a knight would use, a place a knight would go, or a concept a knight would be familiar with. It's a very restrictive deck building challenge in that way, but it's really, really fun. It wins by making a few knights very, very big and swinging for lethal combat damage. So a couple of the key cards, we have Armored Sky Hunter. This is a 4-mana 3/3 with flying. It is a knight.
It's a cat knight.
Cat knight, it's true. It says whenever it attacks, look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may put an aura or equipment card from among them onto the battlefield. If an equipment is put onto the battlefield this way, you may attach it to a creature you control. Put the rest of those cards on the bottom of your library in a random order. So, yes, it's getting an equipment off the top of your library every single turn that it attacks, and it's equipping it directly to something. It's really, really cool.
Strong.
On attack as well. It's great. The other card I want to shout out is a card that I didn't realize how it worked in this deck, and now that I know, I think it's sick. Bloodthirsty Blade. This is a 2-mana equipment that says equipped creature gets +2/+0 and is goaded, and you can pay 1 generic mana to attach Bloodthirsty Blade to target creature and opponent controls. Activate this only anytime you can cast a sorcery. So, this doesn't have a line of text on it that says equip to a creature you control. But when you have Sir Gwyn on the battlefield,
it gives the equipment equipped for 0 to knight.
Equipped 0 knight. So what this shakes out as,
that's so cool,
is you can chuck this on any one of your knights for 0 anytime you like on your turn, obviously.
And it gives it +2/+0.
It gives +2/+2 and it is goaded, but who cares? Like,
you're going to
to
swing
attack.
with it anyway.
You're going to swing. And then in your second main phase, you just pay generic mana and put it on something else and goad it.
That's amazing.
So cool.
I love that.
Such a cool card. The weird pick in this deck is Stand or Fall. This is a 3 Thursdays card. Classic.
It's 3. A weird card.
It is a weird card. For 3 in red, you get an enchantment that says I'm going to pull up the Oracle text real quick. At the beginning of combat on your turn, for each defending player, separate all creatures that player controls into 2 piles, and that player chooses 1. Only creatures in the chosen piles can block this turn. So it effectively says half your creatures can't block.
The definition of divide and conquer.
Yep, straight up. What's this deck like to play against, James?
Finally, a Sir Gwyn deck that just doesn't have really powerful swords. This deck comes to like a total of like $190, something like that. And the reason it comes to such a low price is because you're not a typical Sir Gwyn player being like, Sword of Feast and Famine, Sword of Light and Shadow, Sword of Body and Mind, all these swords, all the swords that just do a ton of stuff. Also, usually Sir Gwyn decks are Voltron.
Yes.
Usually Sir Gwyn is a commander, immediately screams, if you put everything on me, 21 damage, a guy is dead. Like, you swing me at one dude, they're gone.
Yeah.
Like, this, because it has 25 creatures in it, this incentivizes you to go wide. And you're utilizing that line of text on Sir Gwyn, which is probably how the card designer intended it to be played, which is having a lot of knights and Sir Gwyn's like leading them into battle and rewarding you for having an army.
Well, it says whenever an equipped creature you control attacks, draw a card and lose a life. It doesn't say like for each equipment attached to it. So if you have just Sir Gwyn and you attack with Sir Gwyn,
you lose a life, draw 1 card.
But if you have 5 knights that are equipped, draw 5, lose 5. That's way better.
Insanely good.
I think people are building this deck wrong, straight up. But
I would agree. After seeing you build this deck in the way that you've built it, and finally finding the balance of 25 creatures is enough of a critical mass to equip enough things to get value from them. I know you tinkered with that for a long time.
I did have to.
I really enjoy this deck. I actually think that it's how the card designer, I imagine, intended it to be played.
Cool. I appreciate that, because that's my goal when I built the deck. Because I was like, people are doing this wrong. I want to do it right. For me, piloting this deck, it's the ultimate flavor experience. Everything in this deck, you're like, it's a knight. Even the removal spells, there's that removal spell that's not very good and you shouldn't play it. Mortify, but it's got a knight in the art. I had to track down a particular copy of Disenchant that has a knight's chainmail gauntlet reaching for a sword.
Yes, I have seen that. It's a white bordered one as well, isn't it?
It is a white bordered one. It's a super old one, which is always what I want to play anyway. But yeah, it was so fun picking out the specific cards and then tweaking it, being oh man, these 3 cards don't quite fit. I'm going to put 3 more swords in there.
Yeah.
Or hammers or lances.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
It's really cool. It's very flavorful.
It definitely is. So the verdict is, Sir Gwyn is a deck that you can't get mad about. It's extremely flavorful, interesting to pilot, and fairly resilient too. It is a pretty slow deck though, which has its benefits, but it tends to be too powerful to play against precons and too slow to play against much else. I like Sir Gwyn a lot, but she's rarely my first choice, so she's a B.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, it's a good deck. I like it a lot. The flavor is so good.
Yeah, I mean, you run a copy of Greed, which is an incredible enchantment draw spell, but it, the guy on the card looks like he's got knight armor on him, lying on treasure, and it I like the Vorthos idea of this knight is just, obsessed with drawing cards, so he doesn't go out to the battlefield, so he's reclined in this enchantment.
That is so lovely of you to say. I'm so sorry to tell you that Greed is not in the deck anymore.
No! I used to love that card. I actually put Greed, that version of Greed, in my Liesa deck because I loved the art so much.
It's cool.
If you look at the Greed that's in my Liesa deck, it's the same card.
I think I remember seeing it. Yeah, it's super cool. My next deck, this one's near and dear to my heart. I know a lot of people associate this deck with me.
You did play it a lot.
Yes.
When the round Commander Legends, this was your deck that you always reached for.
For sure. So the one we're talking about is Arami of the Dead Tide. So for 1 blue-black, you'll get a 1/4 Merfolk Wizard that says, tap it, exile cards from your graveyard equals the number of opponents you have. Target creature card in your graveyard gains Encore until end of turn. The Encore cost is equal to its mana cost. So Encore, for those who don't know, you pay an activation ability on the card. It exiles that card from your graveyard, but you make a token copy of that card for each of your opponents, and they gain haste. They have to attack this turn if able, and in the end step you sacrifice them. So yeah, basically it scales with the game, and Arami is really good because it also scales with the game because you have to exile cards from your graveyard equal to the number of opponents you have.
So 90% of the time you're exiling 3.
Yeah.
When you get to the last 2 opponents, you're exiling 2.
Yes.
When it's 1-on-1, just 1.
So the cost goes down, but also your benefit goes down, right? Because if you're encoring something and you've only got 1 opponent, it's just like casting it from your graveyard. You're not getting multiple copies of it.
You would much prefer to take out everyone in one go with this deck than leaving 1 opponent.
Definitely. So Arami is a streamlined Encore deck that tries to reanimate creatures with splashy enter the battlefield or dies triggers to win with either combat damage or a big drain effect. In terms of those big drain effects, one of the key cards, and I've spoken about this a lot as being just straight up a win con in the deck. I warned people about it before the game. It's that strong. Grey Merchant of Asphodel. This is the 3 black 2/4 zombie that says, when it enters the battlefield, each opponent loses X life, where X is your devotion to black. You gain life equal to the life lost this way.
Yeah, when there's 3 of these entering the battlefield at once,
it's a minimum of 21 life lost by each of your opponents, and you gain 63, assuming there's 3 opponents in the game.
Yeah, and you have obviously Arami and those 3 Garys, no other black devotion.
Yep, so every single black pip you add is an additional 3 life lost for each of your opponents, and additional 9 life gained for you.
Yeah, it's kind of insane. I'm really happy that you shout, quite loudly say, Gary is in the graveyard now. If you mill it, if you discard it to the graveyard, because it's you could be a really sneaky player and just not say anything, and then on your next turn just win. But I very much value your win con. here.
Yeah.
It's gonna happen.
I think like the first game I played with it when I encored Gary and just won, I just saw people's expressions on their faces and I was like, I don't want people to ever be surprised by this again.
That's fair.
Doesn't feel fair. Another key card in the deck. This is my lovely Thrifty Thursdays Sir Conrad knockoff. Don't worry, Sir Conrad is in the deck as well. Dreadhound. For 4 black, you get a 6/6 demon dog that says, when it enters the battlefield, mill 3 cards, and whenever a creature dies or a creature card is put into a graveyard from a library, each opponent loses 1 life. It's not quite Sir Conrad levels of busted.
It does a pretty good impression of him, though.
It does. Importantly, not legendary. So if you encore this, it mills 9 cards, and every single creature card that hits the bin that turn deals 3 to each of your opponents, because they all see it.
Wow,
It's
that's
sick.
brutal.
It's super cool.
Yeah, that's pretty cool, actually. I was thinking, like, oh, you'd want this, like, you'd want to cast this and have it on the battlefield to stay around because it's not good if you encore it. Actually, no, it's incredible when you encore it. Because it has the mill stapled to it. That's incredible.
I think as well, it would also see, each of them would see all of the other ones die. So I think even when they die, they would all deal 3. Would they deal 3? No, they deal 9. Would they? Hold on. Each of them would see 3 creatures die. It would deal 9 in the end step. When you sack them. That's pretty sick. Wow.
Damn.
I don't play this card enough, evidently.
Dreadhound, bad dog.
The weird card in this deck is a card that I feel like you shout out really often.
I love this card so
strange.
much.
It's Twiddle.
I love Twiddle.
For a single blue, you get an instant that says tap or untap target artifact, creature, or land. You never do any of that stuff except just untapping around me.
Well, I need this in my Tornos deck so I can untap Tornos.
Oh.
But I couldn't find a copy anywhere. So I'm making a public on-podcast statement. If you have a Twiddle for trade, which I highly doubt you will, please email getcommanded@gmail.com.
It's 35 cents, so really the truly difficult task will be finding a card for someone to exchange with you that you have that they want that is also 35 cents.
I'll give you a $5 card for Twiddle. It's worth $5 to me. Like,
what's this like to play against, James?
Look, similar to Marin, this deck, similar to Marin because it's graveyard, but also similar to Marin because of the choices that you have. When you go to your, like, you do your first main phase thing, you play a land, you cast a rock or something like that, and then you go, right, I've got a Rami, got a graveyard full of stuff. What do I want to do? And because you could draw a bunch of cards with like a Mole Drifter, or you could like remove something. You could make everyone sacrifice a bunch of stuff. There's lots of choice in this deck. I also like that it can end the game pretty efficiently. I'm a big fan of ending the game on a turn. Like games that tend to drag out and out and out, and it's like, it feels like one of those limited games where everyone's just got a huge board state,
but
and
no one
can attack, and it just feels like a stalemate. I really like that this deck can do that. I also think there are some like really, really cool shout-outs in this deck that like are generically like pretty decent cards and see Commander play, but in this deck are just so good. Runescarred Demon is a bit of a shout-out in this deck.
Triple Demonic Tutor.
That feels incredible. Like triple Demonic Tutor for Demonic Tutor's rate.
Yeah.
Because like...
Yeah, you're paying 7... Yeah, you're paying 1 more than if you just cast Demonic Tutor 3 times, but it's 1 card.
Yes, that seems incredible.
Yeah, that's so cool. I love Pilot in this deck. It's extremely consistent because it's just got like one game plan. It's just like mill myself, reanimate stuff. Mill myself, reanimate stuff. And some of the stuff you reanimate mills you. It just like all goes full circle. It's very easy to know how you're going to win, but you still have choices. I pull this deck out a lot, definitely.
You do. And it's definitely one of those decks that sits at a really nice power level as well. You can pull this because it's got that, if I reanimate Gary with a big enough board state, I can just win kind of power level of winning on a turn.
Yeah.
But it also sits at lower power levels because people can interact with that interaction easily enough.
Yeah.
You can remove a Rami, stop the reanimation from happening. Even playing Bajuka Bug just sets you back a million miles.
It does. And Rami has to tap as well. So unless I give her haste, and there's only a couple of ways to do that in the deck, you have to like have her sit on the battlefield, usually a full turn cycle, before you're going to do anything.
People see it coming.
People definitely see it coming. So the verdict, how enjoyable is it to pilot? Arami always does the thing. And I find myself very drawn towards playing her when I feel like a game where I get to make lots of game actions. It has robust, varied win cons, and it knows how to get there, and that's really satisfying to pilot. The only drawback is that the deck only really does that one thing, and sometimes I'm looking for a little more from my Commander games. Arami is a B.
Bravo, Arami.
That's
deck.
about half of my deck. So I think
Ooh.
it's time for a thrifty interlude. So we have 8 more decks to cover, but before that, let's hear a little something about a thrifty card. So as is tradition, I'll be performing a monologue. This week, the card is brought to life as a dramatic monologue from the perspective of someone in the card. Would you like to read the card we'll be featuring in this episode?
Sure would. It's Silverblade Paladin for 1 white and a white. You get a creature human knight that's a 2/2. It has Soul Bond. Now, Soul Bond is a keyword ability that says you may pair this creature with another unpaired creature when either enters the battlefield. They remain paired for as long as you control both of them. And then it says as long as Silverblade Paladin is paired with another creature, both creatures have double strike.
The things we've done together, my friend. Do you remember the battle for the 10th district? In perfect unison we were, a blazing force of pure goodness that evil simply could not withstand. Or the skirmish 'neath the world tree, when you impaled that sickening monstrosity, stopping their forces in their tracks. From the automatons of Mishra to the forest beasts of Eldraine and the eternal starfields of Nyx, the list goes on, my friend. Always by my side, never wavering, never tempering in the face of adversity, fear, or hate. It's me and you against the world. Confound them all. I haven't a care for what your parents will say. Kiss me now, sword! Get budgeted!
The love for one sword really goes beyond all manner of relationship.
We've all been there.
Have we? I have not.
I also have not. Except when I imagine that I have. When I write these things. Speaking of, you can catch these every Thursday on Discord, our Discord channel. It's linked in the show notes in the Thrifty Thursdays channel. And you can also see us bring some of these to life in video form over on TikTok at Get Commanded. So follow us on there to see those as they come out.
Yeah, it's actually getting really exciting over there. There are highlights of our podcast
now that we're recording this, yes.
Which is really exciting there. There are highlights, thankfully edited by one of our good friends, Starlight Seller, and the animation drawings done by Dustbin Raccoon, who has done all the amazing art for Get Commanded thus far. Yep. So amazing work to both of them. And yeah, definitely now is the time to subscribe to that channel because there will be more stuff happening.
It'll only get better from here, for sure. Now back to my decks. We're moving into the A and S tiers now.
The good ones.
The really good ones.
Okay, this is the part of the episode you want to listen to.
Yeah, even some of those Bs, I was like, you heard me say, I was like, I like them, but was kind of the thing. A and S are going to have like a lot less of that but bit of it. It's mostly just, I love these decks.
Let's dive in. Who's up first?
So, first on the list is Reese the Redeemed. So, Reese is a 1-mana elf warrior for a hybrid green-white. You can pay 2 hybrid green-white and tap him to create a 1/1 green and white elf warrior creature token. Or you can pay 4 hybrid green-white, and tap him. 6 mana there. And you, for each creature token you control, create a token that's a copy of that creature. So basically just doubles all the tokens that you currently have. Reese is a fairly optimized classic Selesnya tokens list, but with a flicker sub-theme. So I play loads of creatures that enter the battlefield and create tokens, and then I flicker those creatures, exile them, and return them to the battlefield for value, and use Reese to double all of my tokens and cast a big overrun effect for the win. A couple of key cards. We have Armada Worms. This is a classic example of one of those cards that enters the battlefield and makes a token. This one's really good to copy. 2 green, white. It's a 5/5 worm with trample. And when it enters the battlefield, you create a 5/5 green worm creature token with trample. Great.
Strong.
Yeah.
Populating this is good.
And also flickering it is really good.
Yes, that's true.
Another key card, this is a classic one of those flicker spells. This one flickers your whole board. Lae'zel's Acrobatics. This is from Commander Legends Baldur's Gate. For 3 and a white, you get an instant that exiles all non-token creatures you control, then roll a d20. Basically, it has a lot of text on it. If you roll a 1 to 9, you just return those creatures to the battlefield in your next end step. Or if you roll between 10 and 20, you flicker them again, and then they return your end step. So basically, if someone's casting a Wrath and you cast this spell, you're always protecting your whole board because they're always going to be flickered and come back in the end step. But in some instances, they will flicker, come back, flicker, come back.
The really good thing about this spell specifically, it says exile each non-token permanent.
Yeah, non-token creature you control.
Which means that, non-token creature. So it means all those tokens that are being created aren't being exiled and therefore disappear.
Yes.
This is a really good pick.
Because the tokens wouldn't come back otherwise. Thank you. I agree. My weird pick, this is probably my top 3 favorite Magic cards, full stop. Sprout Swarm. So silly. For one and a green, you get an instant with Convoke, so you can tap your creatures to cast the spell, basically, and they pay for generic mana or a mana of the creature's color. Has buyback for 3, so 3 generic, so you can pay 3 generic mana and put the spell into your hand as it resolves. Just says put a 1/1 green Saproling creature token onto the battlefield. However, the Convoke can pay for the buyback. So what this means is if you have 5 creatures and one of them is green, at least one of them is green, you can just tap those 5 creatures and make a Saproling. And for every 5 creatures you have, you can do that again. And of course, once you start getting to like 15, 20 creatures, you can be like, cool, I tap these 20 creatures, make 4 Saprolings. Oh, you need one more. Damn it.
21 creatures.
If you had 25 creatures, you could tap all of them, make 25...
No, the
make
math
5
is wrong.
Saprolings, then tap those Saprolings, cast it again. Anyway, you make Saprolings, and it is literally the definition of exponential growth.
It is really cool.
It's sweet.
I think this, for me, this deck is probably the most Walt deck that you own. I think this is the most Walt. Like, if you look at the card art, or the art on our podcasts, like you are in green, white, superhero clothing,
and I also got like a plant, like it's very green.
Yes, and like this deck has been in a few iterations. I think you had Tatyova. What's the name?
She's in this deck.
She is in the list thing.
Tristani
Discordant.
Discordant, the one that ETBs and makes 2 soldiers.
Yes, you used to have that as the commander, but I think Reese is just such a cool mana outlet.
Yeah.
This deck does one of the best things that I think that we've spoken about in a long time is it can leave up a lot of mana, and then it can sink all that mana into something if you don't need the response that you thought you needed. If you didn't need that protection spell, or if you don't need the removal, you can sink it into Reese or a Sprout Swarm, and you can get value.
It's weirdly a Selesnya deck that can leave up mana. It's quite good at it. And honestly, that's what I like the most about playing it is having that instant speed mana outlet means you can hold up answers. Like you can hold up removal spells, you can hold up that flicker spell, whatever you want. And then no matter what, if nobody does anything that you want to interact with, you just pay 6 into Reese and double all your tokens.
It feels incredible. And look, name a more iconic duo than making a wide board and casting Overwhelming Stampede.
Yeah, it's good.
It's amazing.
The verdict echoes what you said. Reese does my absolute favorite things in Magic. Use enter the battlefield effects and make tokens.
There you go. That's the most Walt deck you could possibly have.
Oh my god. Okay. Buckle in for the rest of the verdict because it gets better from here. It's also a token deck that likes to have answers and work at instant speed, which isn't always how token decks shake out. However, as I've picked up cards over the years, the deck has just gotten really good and isn't always the right power level for a casual game anymore. I still love to pull it out though, and it might be the most Walt deck I own, so Reese is an A. So there you go. James knows me that well. I used the exact words that I used.
Yeah, and I haven't seen Walt's notes on his own decks before this, so
we wrote
this
them
is
completely separately.
Yeah, this is brilliant. It is the most Walt deck you own.
I think you're probably right. Yep. On to the next one. This one's also pretty me. This is the only one where I would specifically like to shout out the name of the deck on Moxfield. I'll do it in a second. I'll tell you what the commander is. This is my Mowu Loyal Companion deck. People who've listened to the last 10 or 12 episodes will have heard of this deck a lot.
Yes.
Mowu is a 4-mana 3/3 with Trample and Vigilance for 3 and a green. And he says, if one or more +1 counters would be put on Mowu, that many +1/+1 counters are put on it instead. So Mowu is a mid-power +1 counters deck that tries to make huge stompy creatures or put a load of counters on Mowu and win through commander damage. Now, the name of this deck on Moxfield is the Disreputable Dog. Some people would look at that and be like, okay, that's like a cool name for Mowu. Like, he's kind of disreputable, I guess. Maybe.
This is a reference, though.
This is a reference to a series of books by Garth Nix called The Aborson. I think they called it Across the Wall. I forget exactly the name of the trilogy, but the first one's called Sabriel. Anyway, in that series, there's a a dog who is an interdimensional being. Basically, like, every time you think the dog has done everything it can do, it does something remarkably weird. And then every time the dog is confronted, like, how'd you do that? She's like, I just wanted to go where you were.
Aww.
It's so cute. Like, talks like a dog would if they could speak English. Anyway.
I just wanted to be where you were. I love that.
Yeah, really, really cute. The disreputable dog. Some key cards in this deck. Iridescent Hornbeetle is one that I've talked about before. This is a 5 mana, 3/4 insect that says at the beginning of your end step, create a 1/1 green insect creature token for each +1 counter you've put on creatures under your control this turn. This gets out of hand really quickly, as you've seen before.
Out of nowhere, this can create a board state that's, super wide.
Yep.
Super wide.
It turns those, like, that super tall board state with +1 counters into a super wide board state really quickly. The other card I'd like to shout out, I think people should be playing this more. I understand it's a 6 mana spell and we don't always have room for them, but it's really good. Titania's Command is a 6 mana sorcery for 4 green that says choose 2. Either you exile target player's graveyard, gain a life for each card exiled this way. Search your library for 2 land cards, not basic land cards, by the way. Put them onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle.
That gets Kabolkov as an Urdog.
Yep. Create 2/2 green bear creature tokens, or put 2 +1 counters on each creature you control.
Hey, this creates bears? I should run this in bears.
You should run this in bears. It also, like, I think the 2 lines of text people are missing the most are weirdly the top 2, which is exile target player's graveyard. You gain 1 life for each card exiled this way.
Each card, not even each creature or each land card. It's each card.
Yeah. What percentage of the time do you reckon when you play sit down for a game is someone playing a graveyard strategy? I reckon 80% of the time.
Yeah, I probably wouldn't say as high as 80, but like I reckon it's a 50-50 coin flip in your pod. Someone cares about having cards in their graveyard. Or incidentally is just putting a lot of cards in their graveyard.
Well, yeah, actually that's a better question. Is how much of the time does someone's graveyard have more than like 15 cards in it? Because sometimes people just draw like 20 cards, discard, 15 of them.
Spellslinger decks are just casting cards to draw more cards to put cards in graveyard. So even if it's not a graveyard focused deck, this can gain you a lot of life.
Gain a load of life. And it searches for lands. Full stop. You can get any land you want out of your library. You can get, for me in this deck, it gets Mossfort Bridge, and that's what gets me excited. But, if you were playing Kabolkovas and Urborg, you could get those. If you were playing Gaia's Cradle, you could get Gaia's Cradle. I think more people should be playing that card. That's why I wanted to shout it out.
Yeah, fair enough.
The weird pick in this deck, I was trying to find low to the ground. This is a deck that doesn't play much ramp.
Sure.
So I wanted to have low to the ground impactful cards. Yep. I wanted to find low to the ground cards, specifically creatures, that would put +1 counters on things and do it repeatedly. So not like enter the battlefield, put a +1 counter. Like something that would do it consistently.
Oh, I've seen you play this card. I couldn't remember the name of it, but now that I'm reading the text, yeah.
It's so weird. For 1 and a green, you get a 2/1 Centaur. It's called Force Mage Advocate. You can tap it and return target card in an opponent's graveyard to their hand. Put a +1 counter on target creature.
Yeah, this is not good. This is not a good card.
No.
But I have seen this card be put to great use in the politics realm.
Yeah, that's what I like about it. That's what I like about it.
This can be like, I can give you back that instant spell that you can't get back any other way, and you get to cast that twice this game. How good would that be?
Yeah.
Or you could be like, hey, you know that board wipe that we desperately need that you discarded to hand size a couple of turns ago? I'll give it back to you if you promise to cast it.
Yeah.
Or
have this removal spell, but it can't come at me.
Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah.
When you use this with politics, mwah, chef's kiss.
It's good. What's this like to play against in a game?
I would say that this deck is incredibly good at, finishing a game. It has so many alternate win cons. The commander damage thing is scary, yes, of course, but, that iridescent Hornbeetle can make a ton of tokens and an overwhelming stampede, even without Moa on the battlefield. They could just be a 4/4, and a bunch of Hornbeetles plus a 4/4 is enough to kill everybody. This is really cool. I think that this deck, you really have to threat assess it correctly.
Yeah.
You really have to go, okay, how big is Moa? Is Moa likely to kill me on commander damage? No. What's the next best thing on Walt's board? If I have a removal spell, Moa might not be my choice. Walt also has to kill 2 other people other than me. It's really good at ending the game, so you have to figure out how Walt is going to end the game and then interact with that specifically. Most likely there'll be another alternative win con in there as well, but threat assess this correctly is my advice for playing against it.
I like that was half compliment and half like, be careful, okay? Be careful.
And I like, look, if you get to play with us in like, public settings at like Command Fest or, at PAX or wherever we're going to be in the future, this is likely going to be a deck Walt busts out. So
yeah, strong chance.
Preparing the listeners.
Thanks so much for that,
You're
James.
welcome.
Asshole. This deck is actually really fun to play. It's all about sequencing, which I really enjoy.
Yeah.
You've really got to think about like the sequence of playing cards in your hand. Like there's a lot of cards that care about the power of a creature you control.
Well, to get like the most value from the +1 counter effects.
Yeah, there's a lot. There's like 4 or 5 of those spells that say like draw cards equal to the greatest power among creatures you control. So obviously you want to draw like 10 or 12 cards with those ideally. So you often have to empty your hand, but then hold up a protection spell so that nothing gets removed. Then play that thing. It's all about sequencing in a good way. Like you have to think about it, but it's not impossible to think about. If that makes sense. Yeah, it's fun.
I like this deck. What's the verdict?
The verdict. Mowu knows exactly how it wants to win and doesn't need to stuff around much to get there, which is an absolute joy when I feel like turning my brain off. It's consistent.
It's mono green.
It's mono
Just go.
green. Just go. It's consistent, streamlined, and really rewards good sequencing. However, it folds to a well-timed removal spell, so it's just not quite where I want it to be yet. Mowu is an A.
We're in the A zone.
We're in the A zone.
Liking these decks. What's next?
Next one we have is a classic. This one actually has a video on the Greensboro Commander Community YouTube channel about it.
We can link that in the show notes as well.
Oh, maybe I should actually.
It's not on our YouTube channel,
No.
but it's on another channel, which is the community where this podcast was birthed, I
Yeah,
guess.
and we're still part of that community for sure. It's my Ishtakik and Rebek Golems deck. So it's weird. So I'll read the most important commander first. It's Ishtakik Salvage Splicer. For 4 and a green, you get a Phyrexian Human Artificer. Doesn't say that on the card.
It's
been errated. When it enters the battlefield, create a 3/3 colorless Golem Phyrexian artifact creature token, also been errated. Whenever an artifact is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, put a +1 counter on Ishtakik and a +1 counter on each golem you control. This has partner with Rebek, Architect of Ascension. For 3 and a white, you get a 3/4 human artificer that says artifacts you control have protection from each mana value among artifacts you control. It's worded so weird. Basically, if I control a 1 mana artifact and a 2 mana artifact, all of my artifacts have protection from the mana values 1 and 2.
Correct.
So, and remember that the acronym for protection is DET. So things that have protection from a given property can't be damaged, can't be equipped or enchanted, can't be blocked, or can't be targeted by things of the chosen type.
They can still die to a board wipe that says destroy all or return all. Anything that's targeting all things or doing something to all is, that's not going to save. Protection's not going to save you from that.
No, it's not. But basically the important thing here is that it's going to give my golems unblockable a lot of the time when I have enough artifacts. That's kind of the reason it's in the deck. So, key cards. One of them is, this is a classic example of a kind of card that is good in only this deck. Bottle Golems. For 4 generic mana, you get a 3/3 golem that has trample, and when it dies, you gain life equal to its power. This is the perfect golem to put 1,000,000 +1 counters on it. It has trample, so it's going to get through, and it'll gain you a bunch of life when it dies. It also kind of wants to die, which is kind of the secret tech of the deck, is you have to have cards. Like, you need golems, but you also need artifacts that want to go to the graveyard.
To trigger Ishtakik.
Ishtakik. The other key card in the deck, and this is a real, this turns everything in the deck on, is Trading Post. This is the 4 mana artifact. Has a bunch of lines of text. I'll just read the last 2 because they're the important ones. You can pay 1 and tap it and sacrifice a creature. Return an artifact card from your graveyard to your hand. Or pay 1 and tap it and sacrifice an artifact to draw a card. So this is really going to get the wheels turning on the deck and make you cycle things out of your graveyard back onto the battlefield. Especially sacking artifact creatures. You can choose either of those 2 abilities to sack them to. Really cool. The weird pick is last week's Thrifty Interlude. It's Glunch, the Bestower.
We love this boy.
He's so good. He's the best jellyfish we've ever seen. For 1 green-white, you get an 0/5 with flying. It says at the beginning of your end step, choose a player. They put 2 +1 counters on a creature they control. Choose a second player to draw a card. Then choose a third player to create 2 treasure tokens. So, as we spoke about in the last episode when we featured this card, it's you give the treasures to someone that's not you because you don't care who uses it. Because when artifacts are put into the graveyard from the battlefield, including your opponent's artifacts, Ishtakik will buff all your golems. So giving your opponent's treasures is actually like really good in this deck. And Glunch is my favorite way to do it because it also just draws you a card in every end step.
It's also a jellyfish.
It's also a jellyfish.
It's funny.
What's this deck like to play against, James?
I love this deck. I think that like you building artifacts you had to do it in green-white. You couldn't have gone red-blue, which is the best colors to build artifact deck in.
No.
But you looked at this commander pairing and went, there's something in this, there's a challenge here. I think the only problem with it for me is it's really fragile. If Ishtakik isn't on field, and to be fair, he is really expensive. He's 5 mana for a 1/1.
Yeah.
Like, he dies to a fart. Yeah. Like a small gust of wind will kill him.
Yeah.
And the amount of times that I've just seen you recast Ishtakik and pass turn. And also the other sad thing is Rebecca doesn't give him protection.
No, because he's not an artifact.
He's an artificer.
Yeah.
So I think it's really fragile. More protection would be better. I actually would like to see you upgrade this deck with the stuff from March of the Machine and Phyrexia Orbi one. There's a lot of Phyrexian tribal stuff that might help the deck.
Yeah, I did. I do have my eyes on a particular card that I saw played in an Extra Turns game on Command Zone's channel recently. It's a 7 mana artificer, but it makes a 3/3 Phyrexian Golem for each opponent you have when it enters the battlefield.
So it makes 3 usually, yeah.
And it gives golems you control indestructible.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
I like that.
Really, really sweet. So I'm definitely going to pick up a copy of that.
Yeah.
In terms of me piloting this deck, I love how many cards are in here that I cast and people go, what is that? What does that do? Please read it. I've never seen that card in my life. This deck has a lot of those in there. And I like that then... I think I've said before that one of my absolute favorite things to happen in Commander is when I can cast something and someone goes, what on earth is that card? They read it and then they go, wow, that card's kind of sick in this deck. That's like my goal as a deck builder is to find cards like that.
You get a giddy joy from that.
Absolutely, I do.
Big shout out to an include that you put in recently, Throne of Geth.
Oh yeah, I can't believe I'd missed this originally.
It was in my Tornos deck and you were like, how the hell did I not have that in? You sacrifice an artifact to Throne of Geth and you proliferate.
Yeah.
So it's like doing the +1 counter thing, it's sacrificing an artifact. It's sick.
It's absolutely perfect. The verdict on this deck, my Golems deck is very near to my heart. There's a reason I featured it in that video on the other channel so long ago. It does another one of my favorite things to do in Magic, which is play weird cards that actually kind of work. It's in colors that I like, and it makes for truly strange play patterns in a good way. The deck is very slow though, and doesn't always pull together all of the cogs it needs to truly whir. And for that reason, this deck is an A.
Doesn't quite make S tier in your mind.
It's close though. It's definitely close.
Definitely getting up there.
I just don't pull it out that often. I think that's a big part of the rating for me, is like how often do I reach for them?
Yeah, that's fair.
My next deck, speaking of old decks, we spoke about Merrin before. This is the first Commander deck I ever built. The cards in it are completely different. I would hazard a guess that there's probably about 2 cards in here that were in the first version of the deck.
Maybe the Commander in a basic plane is like...
Just about. It's Azor the Lawbringer. So for 2 white, blue, you get a 6/6 Flying Sphinx that says, when Azor the Lawbringer enters the battlefield, each opponent can't cast instant or sorcery spells during that player's next turn. That line of text is irrelevant. Whenever Azor attacks, you may pay X, white, blue. If you do, you gain X life and draw X cards. So those of you who've been playing Magic for a while will recognize that line of text as being identical to the card Sphinx's Revelation.
On a stick.
Yeah. So Azor is a heavily optimized Sphinx's Revelation deck. It cares exclusively about drawing cards and gaining life, and preferably cards that do both. It assembles a massive hand, gains a ton of life, and uses those triggers to usually make an absolutely massive creature. This is also the first Commander deck I ever built, though it's changed a lot since then. So a couple of key cards. This is a classic example of one of those cards I want to make really big. And
Card draw matters.
This is probably one of the only cards that was in the original version of the deck, actually, now that I look at it. It's Chasm Skulker. For 2 and a blue, you get a Squid Horror 1/1 that says, whenever you draw a card, put a +1 counter on Chasm Skulker. And when Chasm Skulker dies, create X 1/1 blue squid creature tokens with Island Walk, where X is the number of +1 counters on Chasm Skulker. So yeah, wheel a lot, make a bunch of counters, and then when it dies, get even more creatures. It's
and it gets scary to me very quickly because I'm definitely playing an island.
Yeah. Yep.
You definitely are. Another key card in the deck, and this card works really well with Chasm Skulker, is Wall of Reverence. For 3 and a white, you get a 1/6 with Defender and Flying that says, at the beginning of your end step, you may gain life equal to the power of target creature you control. So yeah, that's going to
really good with Chasm Skulker.
Yeah.
Make Chasm Skulker huge, gain a bunch of life. You're doing the 2 things that the deck cares about.
The ultimate tech is there's a couple of effects in this deck that say whenever you gain life, put that many +1 counters on a creature. So these 2 in conjunction get out of hand. The weird pick in this deck is a card that actually does a lot of work in here, and only in here. Vanish into Memory. For 2 white blue, it's an instant that says exile target creature. You draw cards equal to that creature's power. At the beginning of your next upkeep, return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. If you do, discard cards equal to that creature's toughness. So the tech here is either exiling a creature with a lot of counters on it.
Which there are actually quite a lot in this deck.
Yeah.
There's like a lot of like the Lion, the Ajani's Pride Mate.
Yeah,
gets
those
counters.
sorts of effects. Yeah. That's one way to do it. You can also do your opponent's creatures. So if someone, like, think about how much of the time you're in a game where someone either has like a bunch of auras on something to make it massive or a bunch of counters on something to make it massive, but the actual like power toughness on the card is quite low. Any effect like that means you're going to be like, cool, I exile it. I'm going to draw 9 cards. In the end step, I'm going to discard 1.
Also, sometimes 4 mana, draw 4, discard 4. Not bad.
No, it's fine.
It's really totally serviceable. Like, it gets you the answer that you need. This is a good pick.
Yeah, it removes a blocker too, like or an attacker that someone might have.
Very good point.
So what's it like to play against in a game, James?
I'm just fond of this deck. I have a lot of memories of being in lockdown with you, playing with our housemates at the time, playing 1v1 Commander.
These were my first games of Commander ever.
And like
first games I played.
This was way back in the day when, like, you know, we really didn't understand how different rules worked as well. So some of the things we got wrong, which made for some really weird home games.
Yeah.
I am just really fond of this deck in just the memories capacity of it. So when I see it played and I see that new cards are being put in it, it makes me smile. Like Shabraz, the Sky Shark is a new card that got put in this not too long ago.
Part of a fantastic infinite combo in the deck that kills
you.
me on the stack.
Yeah,
the only infinite that I'm aware of.
If Walt fucks up, he can just die to that.
He can just die.
I just really like playing against this deck. It does what it wants to do. It draws cards. It rewards you from drawing cards. It wants to gain life. It rewards you for gaining life. That's what the deck is, and it does it well.
Yeah, I really enjoy piloting this deck. I think it puts together these 2 things that don't normally go together, and it does it reasonably well. It also makes, like, this is my only budgetless deck. Like, I have always spent a lot more money on this than anything else. If you go on my Moxfield, it's listed as $450 at the moment.
As a present, I think I bought you a Ristic study for this deck.
You did. Yeah, so there's some really powerful cards in this deck. There's also some weird cards. Most importantly, the great cards and the weird cards work together really well, and that's what makes me really happy. So the verdict on this deck, Azor is a no-holds-barred synergistic bomb. I have no other decks like it in power or price, and I love that about it. There are more of these beautiful, strange plays possible for this deck that I obviously enjoyed, but they're supported by really premium interaction, ramp, and probably my best mana base. As I've said a few times though, I rarely play in pods that are this powerful, so I rarely get to pull out this deck. Consequently, it's an A.
Yeah, okay. I see that. I remember a point where the deck was like, can I make this a CDH list? And that was before we understood what CDH was. And you really tried to do it, and then it was just like, you know what? I'll bring it back, but it still sits at that power level where it's like too good for casual.
Yeah, it was definitely sitting at that awful power level where it was not good enough for CDH, way too oppressive for casual, and I was like, no, this is not where I want to be.
That's fair.
I like where it's at. It's just that little bit too powerful a lot of the time. We're moving into S tier, James. And
oh boy.
This first one in S tier will make you very, very happy to hear about. It's Kaza Royal Chaser.
Yes, Walt builds Is It, finally.
Maybe James's favourite deck of mine. But
I reckon.
You'd have to tell me at the end, actually, which one it is. So, Kaza Royal Chaser is a 1/2 with flying and haste. It's a human wizard for a blue-red. You can tap Kaza, and the next instant or sorcery spell you cast this turn costs X less to cast, where X is the number of wizards you control as this ability resolves. So, Yeah, it's a wizard's deck. Kaza is a fairly synergized wizard's deck that tries to make a bunch of wizards, then cast really game-warping spells at a huge discount to draw cards and control the board before winning with a huge burn spell or a massive board and going super wide. A couple of key cards in the deck. Double Vision is one that I really like in decks that try to cast big spells. For 3 red, you get an enchantment that says whenever you cast your first instant or sorcery spell each turn, copy that spell. You may choose new targets for the copy. Very easy to make this into a really game-ending spell. Wizards of Thay is another key card in the deck. This does everything that the deck wants, really. It's a 3/3 human wizard for 3 and a blue. It has Myriad, so when it attacks, you create a token copy of it attacking each other opponent. Instant and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, and you may cast sorcery spells as though they had flash. So this just reduces the cost of spells by like at least 3.
So strong.
It's really, really, really
It's
good.
really, really cool. What's the weird pick?
I'm
curious of what your weird pick for this deck is, because there's a couple of really bizarre cards in this deck.
There are so many I could choose from, but I'll choose one that's actually okay. Surge to Victory. For 4 red, you get a sorcery that says, exile target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard. Creatures you control get +X/+O until end of turn, where X is that card's mana value. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player this turn, copy the exiled card. You may cast the copy without paying its mana cost. Now, the absolute best way to do this is one that I know you have personally pulled off when you played this deck, which is exiling. I think there's only 1 extra turn spell in this deck now, but you exile that extra turn spell. Your creatures get +6/+0 until end of turn, and when they do a combat damage to a player, you get a copy. So you just take an extra turn for each creature that connects. It's wild.
I won the game after that.
I can believe that.
It was like one of those moments. I was in the game store and I was like looking at my decks and I was like, I don't really have anything that I really want to play. So I went over to you and I was like, what decks have you brought with you? Because I've kind of played everything and I want something different. And you opened your box and I saw you've got this box as a red-blue box. And I was like, that one. I want this one. Give me the Wizards deck. And I went over to my pod and was like, look, I'm going to play a Walt deck. Is everyone okay with that? It's like, I know that this deck is pretty powerful. It can win with some really interesting, like, big splashy spells, kind of on-the-spot burn type stuff. And everyone's like, yeah, sure, no worries. And then I did that, and everyone in that pod was like, I didn't know this was what a Walt deck was. I'm like, yeah, extra turn spells. Yeah.
This is the only one of Walt's decks that does this.
It's crazy.
But yeah, it's wild. What's it like to play against?
Look, piloting it is so much fun. Playing against it is kind of spooky.
Right.
It does the typical is it thing of like playing a land and passing, which is this what it's like to play against me where you're like, what is he about to do?
A lot of the time, yeah.
I think that the deck is like really cool because like in the early game, you're just casting these like weird wizards and you're like, oh, it's a wizard tribal deck. And then out of nowhere, you can be like, all right, Storm King's Thunder. A big burn spell. And I'm like, do you win? And you're like, I think so. Let's do the math.
Yeah, straight up.
It is a really cool deck to see get to its like critical mass, which is the game-winning position where you tap Kaza and it's, you know, you cast a Storm King's Thunder for X equaling 7. Yeah. Something like that. Like, that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And then casting a burn spell. It's like, okay, how do you even stop that except out of a counter spell?
Yeah.
Like,
it's pretty busted in that way. Look, it's a fun deck to pilot. It's fun to have all of the answers, and also, as I've increasingly tinkered with this deck, for the answers to be really weird. Because you can justify these really high mana value instants in particular, because you can just like tap Kaza, cast them on someone's end step. I've put some really weird cards in this deck. Like when I was picking the weird pick, I was like, man, I could pick like half this deck at this point. I've actually taken out a lot of the burn spells.
Interesting.
Because I want to find other ways to win. And so there's still like Storm King's Thunder is still in there. Electro Dominance is still in there as the main burn spell. But I actually took out what's the one that has multi-kicker? Comet Storm.
Oh, yeah.
Comet Storm's gone. I just found I was winning with specifically that card way too much of the time.
Yeah.
So it might come back in, but for now I'm trying to go down the route of like, okay, what weird stuff can I copy? Like Mob Rule.
That's
or
cool.
Dance with Calamity or Soulfire Eruption. There's so many different avenues to go down, and everything's weird. And yeah, like it's a weird deck of mine that also actually works really well.
Yeah.
Which is kind of a rarity. Like most of the decks, as they get weirder and weirder on my like axis of weird, they tend to also move down the power level thing. This is not really one of them for me.
No, well, it's like Spellslinger, but you've somehow made it Vorthosy wizard type creature base. Like, I don't know how you managed to do that, making a typal strategy with big spells. You did it really well. But like, shout out to like cards like Sublime Epiphany, which are just good in most commander decks, brilliant in this deck.
This becomes counterspell.
It does.
With upside.
It's so cool.
It's so cool. So the verdict on this deck, Kaza is an extremely wacky deck with a lot of really fun weirdos in it. There are a million answers to every question, including, Walt, what are you doing? And I never run out of interesting things to try in a game. Most importantly, this is my absolute favorite deck to tinker with because every set gives us new, weird, high mana value spells to play with. Kaza is a blast that is often my first choice deck at a random pod, and it's an S.
Yeah, happy that this is an S for you.
It was hard for me to admit. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah.
It was like,
is it sitting in the S tier?
Yeah,
Woo!
exactly.
Storm of Saruman might be a good pick for this deck from the new Lord of the Rings deck.
I've thought about it.
Maybe.
Yeah, I'm definitely considering. I'll probably have to monitor where the price ends up. To be honest,
probably.
That'll be a big factor for me. Next on my list, we have another creature type deck. It's Catilda and Lear. So this is a very recent card printed in the... they came in the pre-release packs for which set? What was the last set that came out? Aftermath? March of the Machine. No, I think it was March of the Machine.
It was March of the Machine, not Aftermath. Aftermath only has like a limited number of creatures, but these are the pair up ones. Like,
yes, the team up kind of like end game style.
Usually two people from the same plane teaming up to fight the Phyrexian invasion.
Yeah, and then
I really like the flavor of it.
Yeah, and often their abilities, and this is definitely an example, like they combine the two things that those individual creatures do in a new and exciting way.
On Innistrad, it was Talia and the Gitrog.
Yeah, which is really strong, by the way.
Really, really good.
Yeah.
What's yours?
This one's Catilda and Lear. For green, white, blue, you get a 3/3 human that says, whenever you cast a human spell, target instant or sorcery card in your graveyard gains flashback until end of turn. The flashback cost is equal to its mana cost.
Super cool. So Catilda caring about humans and Lear caring about instants and sorceries.
Yep.
You get this weird, like, you want to have the creature type human, but you also want to have spell slingers.
Yeah, straight up. So Catilda and Lear is a very casual humans deck that wants to get massive value from casting spells multiple times in a turn. It tries to build a super wide board, have a million answers, and either win with a huge storm count or more often, a ton of little human boys.
Yep, fair.
A couple of key cards. The best human in the deck, in my opinion, would have to be Crib Swap.
It's the typal instant shapeshifter.
It is technically a human because the card has Changeling. So this says, it's an instant that says, Changeling, exile target creature. Its controller creates a 1/1 colorless shapeshifter creature token with Changeling. So the thing that happens here, when you cast human, something in your graveyard gains flashback till end of turn, right? This is a human spell.
Because the spell has Changeling, it's every creature type. So even though it's an instant spell, it is actually a human that triggers Catilda and Lear, which means it gives something in the ground. I love this. This is sick. How is this not your weird pick?
There's a weirder pick.
Really?
Is the real answer.
Okay.
I mean, maybe. I think Crib Swap sees enough play that I don't feel quite like it's not weird enough.
Sure.
I guess,
Okay. Fair enough.
I like shouting out those cards people haven't seen, I guess is the thing. Yeah. Crib Swap's great. Yeah. It also, then you can flash it back, and then when you flash it back, it's still a human spell.
It still
you
triggers
cast another
again.
human spell. It's
Love
so
it.
cool. Another key card in the deck is, and this is just an example of the kind of humans you want, low mana cost humans that care about spells.
Oh, Wrath.
Nice. Weatherlight Stalwart. So for white and a blue, you get a 1/3 human wizard that says, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you may tap 2 untapped creatures you control. If you do, draw a card. It also has the ability to pump your board for a bunch, but you're never going to use that. It's that casting instants or sorceries and drawing cards by tapping things. It's a low to the ground human, so it's very easy to get that cast trigger on Catilda and Lear with this.
Love this card.
My weird pick is Jailbreak. For 1 and a white, this is a sorcery. This is from the new Capenna Commander decks. It's strange, and I see why no one plays it, but
I
I
now
like
remember
it.
you talking about this card, yeah.
So you return target permanent card in an opponent's graveyard to the battlefield under their control.
You really like doing this, apparently.
Apparently. I'm seeing a recurring theme here. When that permanent enters the battlefield, return up to one target permanent card with equal or lesser mana value from your graveyard to the battlefield. So basically the way this goes, let's say James is playing, I don't know, a zombie deck. He's got a 4-mana zombie in his graveyard. I cast Jailbreak. I bring that zombie back from your graveyard to the battlefield. It's a 4-mana spell, so I can bring back a permanent with mana value 4 or less from my graveyard to the battlefield as well. For 1 and a white. So like...
That's pretty good. 1 and a right, return pretty much anything you want. And you can also like be a bit tricky here. You can get something that's really high value for you, and you can return something that's like mid, low, not that great for your opponent.
Yeah. You pick something your opponent doesn't need. Or you politic. You go like, oh, what do you need back from your graveyard? Cool. If you do that, can that not swing at me? And I'm going to bring back this thing.
Yeah. Feels really cool.
Super cool.
Every time I hear this card's name, I just think of the Thin Lizzy song Jailbreak. Tonight there's gonna be a jailbreak.
I don't think I know
somewhere in this town. You should listen to it. It's a great song.
Oh, damn. Okay, there you go. There's a theme song that accompanies that song. James, what's it like to play against this deck?
Look, I've only played against this deck a couple of times because it's pretty new, but it works. I'm shocked at how well, like, this is one of those commanders that say you have to do a lot of things and a lot of hoops to jump through to get this deck working. And it reads like that on the card. It's honestly not that hard. You cast a human and you can choose a spell to cast for flashback. It's just good value. And I think this is a lot to say about commanders that don't draw a lot of heat. Like, if you cast, for example, Atraxa, or Elish Norn, or I'm just thinking Praetors for some reason. If you cast, like, Niv Mizzet Perun as another good example, just, like, really big, powerful commanders that are like, if you don't remove this commander, I'm going to win somehow. And this is such high value for me. If you've got removal, use it on this.
Yeah.
Catilda and Lear does not say that at all.
No.
I'm not scared of Catilda and Lear, so it usually stays around.
Yeah.
And it usually gets you so much value that you win the game just by accruing so much value.
Well, it's kind of, you'll remember from the Glass Cannon episode, this was like the anti-Glass Cannon deck that I built as opposed to my old Tygam list. Tygam's in the 99 of this deck, by the way.
Still really good.
Yeah, still really good. But yeah, like this was specifically a deck that I wanted to build where the commander wasn't essential. And yeah, I think I did that reasonably well. In terms of piloting this deck, this is a very, very rare deck, and I discovered this the other day, and this is what bumped it up into S tier for me. This is a deck that's fun to lose with.
Ooh.
And I mean that genuinely. I lost 2 games in a row very quickly with this deck. I think you might even have been in both of these games. I lost very quickly both games with this deck. I had a blast both of those games. There was just so many things to do.
Well, the deck does the thing. We talk about the thing that your deck wants to do, and this deck very consistently does it.
Yeah.
Which you should be very proud of this deck.
Thank you. I am. The verdict. How enjoyable is it to pilot? Well, it's the ultimate value engine, but it's not essential for the deck working to have Catilda and Lear on the battlefield, which makes for really varied gameplay. There are a million branches you can go down when piloting this deck, and it's fantastic to know that you have answers to anything people throw at you. This is a strong, fun deck that is limited in power by its commanders, or commander, I should say, and can subsequently be played at almost any table. I love playing this deck, and it's an S.
Love it. I really like this deck as well. I'm really proud of you for building something that isn't a glass cannon. Like, genuinely, I'm really happy that you like saw a problem in your deck building and solved it with a deck.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I'm stoked with it, honestly.
Yep.
I mean it. It's fun to lose with.
It's great.
It's so cool.
Shout out to our very old episode, How to Lose.
Oh, true. Yeah, good one. We have one deck left to go.
Oh, this has been a long one. I haven't feel
one.
like we've been speaking for this long because I honestly am just looking at Moxfield lists and I enjoy doing that. So let's keep going.
Thanks for sticking with me on the ride. I feel like this is very indulgent of me to just like ramble about my decks for a while, but it's been fun having some company.
Well, I'm scared that the Space Commanders are going to come back and ask about mine, so you're going to have to strap in for my list.
That's true. It's only fair. So the last deck that I would like to talk about today is my Queen Marchesa deck. So Queen Marchesa is a human assassin. It's a 3/3 for 1 red, white, black. She has Death Touch and Haste. When she enters the battlefield, you become the Monarch. And at the beginning of your upkeep, if an opponent is the Monarch, you create a 1/1 black assassin creature token with Death Touch and Haste. So, this deck is a deck that is built entirely for my partner, Electra.
Who doesn't play Magic.
Doesn't play
at
Magic,
all.
quite explicitly. So, yes, it's inspired by her. It's not for her.
Yes. It's a bit of an ode to Electra
Yes.
in the form of a commander deck.
It's exactly that. So it's full of goths, vampires, Greek-inspired gods, looking at you, Theros, and other things that she thinks are really cool. I have had every card in this deck has had to get the Electra tick of approval. It has to have been cool and goth and interesting enough that she liked looking at it.
I've seen the process of this as well. It's like, it's a good, she takes her time and considers
She
whether or
does.
not it's her enough.
Yes. It's a reasonably powerful Aristocrats deck, so it's trying to sack things for value. So it wins by either draining the table with a vampire, or going super wide with tokens, or stealing everyone's graveyards with Command the Dread Horde and winning with the original Magic Goth girl, Liliana. A couple of key cards. One of them I want to shout out here because this deck actually has a bit of a weenies sub-theme. In other words, creatures with like low power, low casting cost. Graceful Restoration. For 3 white, black, you have a sorcery where you choose one. Either you return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield with an additional +1 counter on it. That seems like a pretty bad rate. It's not
For 5 mana, yeah. We spoke about returning rates in another episode, and that's bad.
overcosted for sure, but you can also return up to 2 target creature cards with power 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield.
Now that is a good rate.
Yes.
But get 2 creatures back for 5 mana. Seems pretty good.
Especially in a deck where you're going to be sacrificing creatures, right? You're going to be able to get those creatures in the bin, then reanimate them. Yeah, it's doing all the stuff.
Nice.
Also like to shout out Morbid Opportunist. We've spoken about this card before. We both rate it super highly.
So good.
For 2 and a black, you get a Human Rogue. It's a 1/3 that says, whenever one or more other creatures die, draw a card. This ability triggers only once each turn. Importantly, it doesn't have to be your creatures.
Nope.
If anyone's creatures die, you draw a card. Only once a turn, but like it's going to check on every single person's turn. You'd be amazed how often this triggers.
Play this card just one time, and you'll be surprised how often you draw. It's insane.
Totally. It's so good. My weird pick, I think this card is super good. You have to play it. It's a card that makes spirits. It wants to be in a deck that doesn't play spirits. It's so particular, but if you do it, it's so good. It's Requiem Angel. For 5 and a white, it's a 5/5 angel with flying that says, whenever another non-spirit creature you control dies, create a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying.
You win with this card so often. If you have a sacrifice outlet and a drain effect, you basically do the math on your board. You go, how many creatures have I got? Times by 2, because every single one of these that's gonna die and drain creates a 1/1, so I can sack and drain for another one.
The really key line of text here is the fact that it doesn't say non-token on it. So you can sack token creatures, and as long as they're not spirits, they make spirits.
So strong.
Really hard to find cards that actually read like that.
Yeah.
Most of those effects will say non-token, but this one says non-spirit. So yeah, it's really sick.
Incredible.
What's this like to play against in a game, James?
Look, I'm not gonna lie. This is an Aristocrats list that I wish I could build. I'm currently building a Scorpion God, black-red, neg 1 counters Aristocrats
Yep.
thing.
I've seen the super early version of this deck.
It's getting there. It's on Moxfield, but it's definitely needing work. But this deck always does the Aristocrats thing. I've never gone up against it and it not get to the point of I've got a board where I could instantly kill you just by sacking things, which is so aristocratsy.
Yeah.
The other thing that this deck does, which is surprising considering you had to get the tick of approval from Electra on all of these cards, I don't think I've ever seen you with like a completely empty hand, maybe like one time. But even in those situations, you've got enough ways of interacting with your graveyard that you've got a bunch of choices.
Yeah.
It always finds the best value piece to put in onto the battlefield to drain or to generate like a bunch of mana or draw you more cards. I just think this is sick. And I also, huge shout out to Electra for drawing your assassin tokens that Marchesa makes. I
got some custom proxies made, and they are, the 1/1 Death Touch Haste assassins are drawn by my partner, and I use them every game. It's awesome.
They're very cool.
I'm totally with you on the card draw thing. This is another one of those decks that I think most people are building wrong. Most people who build Queen Marchesa explicitly build all these things that say like, don't attack me. Like they build a prison and then they're like, I'm I'm the monarch, I keep the monarch all the time. Queen Marchesa only triggers when you're not the monarch. So in my opinion, my humble opinion, the card implies actually giving the monarchy away and then using your Death Touch haste assassins, which no one's ever blocking, by the way.
To get it back.
To get it back.
Yep.
It's so rare that I don't either end up like drawing a card in my end step and giving a card to someone else and then just keep on doing that. And I get the assassin every turn. It's perfect for an Aristocats deck.
The other really cool thing is if you're clever about, who you give the monarchy to in the turn rotation, you can really incentivize your opponents to swing at each other.
Yeah.
And when I play against this deck, I've often been like, I really want that monarchy. So I'm coming at you, Theo, because you stole it from Walt last turn and I'm getting it back. Yeah. And then on your turn, you're like, all right, I swing a 1/1 Death Toucher at you. I'm like, nah, no block. There's the monarchy back.
Straight up. It's so cool. In terms of piloting this deck, for me, this was the ultimate deck building challenge. Like, even my Knights Vorthos deck was not that much of a challenge. This one really, really tested my deck building abilities. And it's really cool to feel that the deck actually kind of works. I built it early on, and I think my first few games I was introducing it and being like, this is a flavor deck. I don't think it's going to work. I said that for so many games. I've stopped saying that.
It works, man. It
totally
works.
does work. And it's just such an experience playing all these cards that I know my partner would love. The verdict on this deck: Marchesa is a resilient, streamlined deck that accrues value slowly and only if you think your way through it. It's strong, but fair, and clear about what it's trying to do, which makes it appropriate for many different tables. More than any other deck I play, this is a deck that tells a story to the table, but it also tells a story to me about two nerdy creatives who met in Melbourne 4 years ago and the journey they've shared together. This deck is maybe my proudest creation, and it's an S, with love.
Yeah, this is art, but in the form of Commander. I love it so much.
I love it. I love it so much.
We did it!
All of my decks.
All of Walt's decks.
All of them. So, let's run through the tiers again, just in case you lost track.
Sure.
I don't blame you. It's been a long time. In S tier, I had Marchesa, Catilda and Lear, and Kaza. This is all in declining order, so best to worst. In A tier, I had Azor the Lawbringer, my Golems deck, Mowu, and Reese. In B, I had Araumi, Sir Gwyn, and Merrin. In C, I had Averna and Estrid. And in D, I had Yashan, Kraken Acroma, and Wart. Now, I would like to know what tiers these decks go into for you in terms of playing against them, or how much you think I have fun when I play them.
I'm glad you asked, because I actually prepared this.
Sure.
I saw this Space Command and was like, no, I want to tier Walt's decks. So my tiers for your decks I'll go from worst to best. In D tier, I've actually got Krak, Chroma, and Wart.
Okay, similar to mine.
Similar to yours. In C tier, Seguin, Averna, and Golems. I'm sorry.
Okay.
B tier, Arami, Estrid, Yashan. And A tier, Azor, Kaza, Mowu, and Reese. And then S tier, Merrin, Marchesa, and Catilda and Lear.
So there's a fair bit of overlap here. I'd be interested to talk about I think there's three that we're quite different on. The first one that comes to mind, Merrin, you have in S tier.
I love this deck, man. It's really, really good. I said it when we were talking about it in this episode, and I think that it does the thing really consistently, and it's a Merrin deck that doesn't make me groan.
Yeah.
It's not a birthing pod deck. It's not the way you had it built earlier. Yes, I groaned at it. But this version of it, it's found its feet, it's found its home, and you win with it. I think it deserves a spot in the S tier because, I reckon this is the deck that you pull out when you're like, I'm sick of losing. I kind of want to win a game.
That's probably true. To be honest, I think this is an interesting one because this is not a deck that I reach for very often, but it's a deck where when I do reach for it, I have a blast.
Yeah.
So maybe it's just a thing where I need to play this deck more because it is
I think so.
really fun when I do play it.
Yep.
The next one I thought we were a bit different on, Sir Gwyn. You had quite low. I had it sort of around the middle of my tiers. What is it about Sir Gwyn that you don't like?
I just don't like how it doesn't win, mainly. I just think that it's I very rarely see it win. It gets a lot of value and deals a lot of damage, but there's so often, the gameplay of, losing life to draw cards with your commander. Sometimes each turn, you're punching yourself in the face for, 6 life.
Yeah.
Drawing 6 cards, but then discarding 4. It's There's something about this deck that I'm like, I love the flavor of it and the Knights theme and stuff, but there's something about the fact that it doesn't win that irks me.
Right.
And I think the only way to make it better is the reason I said it was so good is because it doesn't include all of the really good swords, the equipment. If you did include those, you would be winning so many more games.
Oh yeah, just a sort of feast and famine in this deck would be like an exponential increase in power.
100%.
That's fair. Yeah, I think I actually I agree. It is sad that it doesn't win more often, but I also I think it's good to have some decks like that, I guess is my thinking. But I see why you rated it low. I agree. It very rarely wins. The other one, I think this is the biggest discrepancy. The Golem deck. I had this in, I think, A or B?
I think you had it quite high.
Quite high. You've got it
I said it
very
in C,
low in C. What is it about the Golem deck you don't like?
The casting cost of Ishtakik probably being the one thing. I also just think, like, the deck is not in its right colors. I feel like it could be built with different commanders and still do the same thing, maybe.
Yeah.
But also, like, you know, there are just so many, in my opinion, funner artifact decks to play. Like, I've built Tornos recently, and Tornos is an absolute blast for me because it does artifact things. You're doing creature things with artifacts. I don't know. I feel like if you're playing with artifacts, play with artifacts.
Yeah, that's fair. I think at the very least, if I had blue in there, it would be much stronger.
Blue, you'd be gassed.
Yeah,
even red, maybe even red.
It's interesting though because then it wouldn't be the same to me. Like I actually enjoy, as we've discovered with a few of those decks, I actually quite enjoy a challenge, and I think the green white for the golems actually is what makes it really challenging to me.
Yeah, I appreciate it as a deck building challenge and the fact that you did it and it works, you know, some of the time. But the reason I ranked it lower was because I just couldn't stop my brain going, it just doesn't win and it doesn't do enough. And
That's true.
Like, I think it's going to get better and better. I think after you have a look at, like, I know you've included some of the Phyrexia All-Be-One cards. I know you got that, like, Ozolith thing in there now as well. But
also the Shattered Spire is really good in the deck,
I think it will just get better and better. And when I start seeing it work more and more, I'll probably bump it up in my opinion.
I respect that. That makes a lot of sense. Well, I've built a lot of commander decks, but not all of them are hits right out of the box or ever. Walking you through all my decks, the things I enjoy about piloting them, and the things that those around me gain when I play them, has given me a lot of awareness of what it is I'm looking for when I play Commander, and I hope it's caused you to reflect on the same for yourself. We play a wild format, but somehow we mostly end up having a good time together, and that's why we love it. So, Space Commanders, command received. Whew.
Yeah, God, this has been a long haul. If you've wanted an episode where Walt just, like, dances around the room and says, look at me, this is your episode. I hope you enjoyed it.
Wow, I see how you really feel. So the listeners out there, do you feel commanded? What do you think of my commander decks? Which of these decks have you never heard me talk about or seen me play? I really want to know which of those you're kind of like, wow, Walt must not like that deck very much because he never mentions it.
Now, look, if you want to see Walt play these decks, you can actually get in touch with us via email, join our Discord, and the Discord really is the best place to do it because we'll be streaming spell table games on there occasionally. But also, bit of a shout out to our Twitch, which we talked about at the start of the episode, which we're really trying to get some Commander games streamed soon. So go and subscribe to the Twitch channel. It's Get Commanded. So go and have a look on twitch.tv/getcommanded to subscribe to that.
Yeah, definitely do. You can also follow us on Twitter to see our thoughts on upcoming cards, sets, events, and just other general Magic the Gathering updates that don't qualify as a podcast episode. We're at Get Commanded on there. And of course, don't forget to check out our Patreon page, which is linked in the show notes, for more ways to support the Get Commanded podcast directly. We would like to thank our patron, Stella Tam, and a very special shout out to Fletcher Cutting, who supports us in the Space Commander tier. You're the best, Fletcher.
You are the best. And Palms Off Gaming, you're also the best. They sponsor this podcast. They create some really good deck boxes, sleeves, binders, and all those gaming accessories you need to keep your cards safe. Check them out at palmsoffgaming.com.au. What an episode, Walt. This has been a big one.
Whew.
Do you want to walk away from your Commander decks for a bit and planeswalk somewhere else?
Let's planeswalk to my work.
Fun. Yeah. The two things you do in life. Build Commander decks and work.
Yeah. I mean, I realised it's something I've never talked about on the podcast before. I don't think, anyway, or maybe very, very briefly.
We've spoken about my job at a university.
Yeah.
Come on.
I work part-time at a theatre venue called Arts Centre Melbourne.
Yeah, one of the biggest in Melbourne.
Yeah, I'm specifically shouting it out because I actually saw a couple of members of our community at an event recently.
Did you really?
Yeah, so I was working in the box office, which is where I work, and I happened to be out on the counter, which is not something I do very often because I'm usually sort of back in the manager's office. And a couple of members of our community rocked up because it was the Game Grumps Live.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense.
So I saw them and I was like, I see why you're here. And they waved, but they looked really shocked. And I realized, wow, I don't really mention my work very often to many people. So, I work in this great theatre venue. We have all sorts of different stuff. Game Grumps felt like a real clash of interests to me, to be like, oh my god, my two interests are colliding.
That's cool.
Because Aaron Hansen, I don't know if people know, but plays Commander. He's been on
He's been
Commander
on
at
Game Nights.
Home. He's been on Game Nights. Really, really cool guy.
Maybe Extra Turns he was on. I can't remember if he was on it.
He's been on Commander at Home, I know for sure. And I think he's also been on like Elder Dragon Hijinks.
Yeah.
That one that Ailish and Ailey and Olivia Gobert-Hicks run. I work in a theatre venue.
Well, look, if you're ever going to the theatre in Melbourne, keep your eyes peeled for there might be a little Walt running around behind the scenes,
behind the box office somewhere, tucked away. Probably I'll be there, having fun and meeting other creative people, which is really the best part of the
job. And like you're in the space that you really care about. Like the reason why we have these thrifty interludes, honestly, is a way for you to be like, this is way I can stretch my creative muscles and do something that's also MTG themed. Yeah, but I'm really glad that you work in a place like that. It's I'm really looking to get into a space that I'm in an industry where I'm really passionate about it. So props, man. It's a good place to work.
It's cool.
And I get a lot of benefits. I get to go see theatre shows.
Yeah, sometimes we get sneaky free tickets, and James has seen two or three, and
then we also went to we went Leno and Woodley.
Yes,
that was incredible. But occasionally Walt will message me and be like, "Hey, you free in like a couple of weeks? There's this show that I'm keen to take you to." Yeah, I love it.
It's a good place to work. That's all we have time for. So we'll see you next Friday for another transmission from the Space Commanders.
Goodbye, Commander players.